It's November 15th, 2016, and we're here for our regularly scheduled Brattleboro Selectboard meeting. I call the meeting to order at 6:15. I want to welcome everybody who's watching us on TV, whether live or recorded. I want to welcome everybody who's in attendance at tonight's meeting, VCTV operators, member of the press, and our ASL interpreters. The first item on tonight's public meeting agenda is to approve the minutes from November 1st.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes from November 1st. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions about those minutes? Is there anybody in attendance who's got any questions or comments about those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining?
Me.
Dad, you want to abstain?
Well, I wasn't here.
Well, that's okay. You don't have to abstain, but you can if you want to
Okay,
abstain.
You're just
Sure.
accepting.
All right.
I'll accept them, but.
All right. Well, if you want to accept them,
Sure.
is that a yes vote? Okay, so that carries 5-0. That's a parliamentary
Yeah, Robert's Rules of
lesson
Orders,
right there.
don't
You can
have
vote to approve the minutes even if you
I
wanted to
just
meet.
wanted to be transparent.
Very nice.
You were last
Next
week.
item on the agenda tonight is chair's remarks. First, it's hard to believe that it's come so quickly, but Thanksgiving is next week.
Oh.
So we want to wish everybody a happy and a safe holiday, and wish everybody who's traveling safe travels. I also want to take this opportunity to note that the skate park has received its approvals. Both the Act 250 and the stormwater permit for the skate park and the dog park have been issued for the plans as submitted to the Brattleboro Development Review Board and the Natural Resources Board. So that's a significant accomplishment for the skateboard park and the dog park enthusiasts and sponsors. Those permits run through October 2019, and construction needs to commence before October 2019 in order to avoid having to resubmit the plans, and the development can be phased at either of those activities as long as it's begun by October 2019. Once again, we want to congratulate everybody who's participated in that effort and encourage anybody who wants to contribute to help support the construction of the skate park to do so. I also want to note that we're going to be beginning tonight with a series of meetings addressing budget-related issues that are going to be happening weekly. Even though we are not going to be having regular meetings every week, we will be meeting for budget matters pretty much weekly from now through the middle or the end of December.
Yay.
And there's also other business that we're going to be tending to. For example, although it's got budget implications, we've also got separate issues that we need to deal with respect to our relationship at the town with the Windham Solid Waste Management District. I did have the opportunity to read in the newspaper, and we'll be having a committee report, I expect pretty soon, about what's being proposed for next year's budget at the Windham Solid Waste Management District. And I do think that based upon my consultations with administration, town manager, that the board will need to make a decision at the beginning of December whether we're going to continue sending our recycling to the Windham Solid Waste Management District, or whether we're going to send that to a private contractor. And we are, I expect, I've talked with the vice chair already, going to have that on the agenda for our December 6th meeting, so that the board can make a decision at that time whether we should be sending our recycling to Casella and Rutland, or whether we're going to continue sending it to the Windham Solid Waste Management District. There's been public discussions about that so far, and we're going to continue having discussions about those matters. But I do anticipate we'll be making that decision on December 6th, along with a series of other matters. So that's a little preview. That's all the chair's comments that I have. Next matter on the agenda is Town manager's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick comments tonight about some construction activity right here nearby that you may have noticed, and so I want to make sure that the public was aware of and understood why it was occurring. First, in the High Grove lot, there's been some work preparing for the installation of chargers for electric vehicles. The site work has been done there. There's been some repaving for wiring that had to be run under the parking lot. And soon the actual charging stations themselves will be installed. One's there already?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, they're
Operational.
ahead of where I thought they were.
Every
And that work is being done for and being paid by Green Mountain Power. It's important to note that this public amenity within our parking lot is made possible by this partnership where we allowed the space to be used because it works for the users of the lot. But the cost of the installation and the cost of the electric power that's going to flow from those stations is being performed by Green Mountain Power, no cost to the town. Nearby, actually, in the entrance and the parking lot here at this building, there's also been some construction work over the last couple of weeks and a newly repaved section and restoration from that. And that was in preparation for the improved fire sprinkler system that's being installed as part of the three-phased state-required life safety improvements here in the building. So you'll recall we had we were out of compliance. We received an order from the state saying that we had to make certain improvements. We asked for the opportunity to do that over a 3-year period so that we could afford the work that needed to be done. The state approved the 3-year plan. Town meeting approved the funding for a portion of that to get it started. We've got a portion also proposed for next year's budget that will be part of what we begin to talk about tonight. But phase 2 of that is the sprinkler system, and we needed an increased water service to the building in order to provide enough water pressure to adequately supply the enhanced fire sprinkler system, and so that work has recently been completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next matter on the agenda is Select Board comments and committee reports. Is there anybody for Select Board comments and committee reports?
Shall I report on the waste management meeting?
Go ahead, please.
Well, as you may have read in the paper, not as much detail as what actually happened at the meeting, but the Waste District passed a budget which retains the current MRF and applies a 20% surge charge to the outlying towns for trucking of waste, which is one of the things that we had been concerned with. The equity or the fairness of those fees had been part of what started the whole process of looking at the alternative assessment model that we participated in since last April. The vote on whether to close the MRF didn't come up. The motion was made to keep the to pass the operations budget and include the 20% surcharge, and I amended the motion successfully to separate the MRF out so we could have a straight up or down vote on whether to keep the recycling facility or not. And after further conversation on the amended motion, a number of towns changed their perspective and the 20% surcharge was put back in. So the motion remained two parts, the budget and the surcharge. So that passed. I voted for it. And because it retained the waste district without driving a lot of towns out with excessive cost, and because the MRF was not going to come up for an up or down vote. And the two other alternative funding, 75, 25, and 50-50 assessment balance between population and grand list were also not going to come to a vote. The 20% reduction, or the 20% surcharge was a late entry into the process, and convinced most of the people in the room that that was the way to go. So that's where we are. And just as the chairman said, now it's time for us to decide whether Brattleboro's interests are best served by remaining part of the Windham County Waste Management District, Solid Waste Management District, or contracting with a private firm. So we will decide that.
So I guess I have a question. What I read in the paper was that we cast, or you cast our votes in favor of keeping the MRF open. It sounds like you did that because it was tied to the 20% surcharge.
Yeah, the question of keeping the MRF open separate didn't come up, and would not have passed anyway.
I'm confused.
And well, you should be.
I'm confused.
So you had an amendment, or you had a motion?
There was a motion to pass the operations budget, which included the MRF, with the 20% surcharge to the surrounding towns, which meant a 6% reduction for,
But the
All
board
the other
here
towns.
never talked about it.
but the what?
The board here never
No,
talked
this
about
was
that.
after this was last Thursday night.
So, but with no consensus from the full board here.
Well, we never talked about that, the 20% option, because it wasn't ever on the table before. We talked about the, some balance of, or some relationship of grand list and population. And we talked about the MRF itself. But we didn't talk about the surcharge option, which reduced the assessments for most of the towns, and for the ones that are further away, it increased theirs. But it reduced, the increase was not as great as it would have been under the 75-25 or 50-50, which would have driven several of those towns out of the district.
Well, the way I read it in the paper, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but and I was under the assumption that the board voted 3-1, or while I was gone, because I kept up with it, that we were gonna close the MRF, that was the vote.
We
So
voted to
I don't
close the
know,
MRF, yeah.
and in the paper, it really read like that. I mean, it read like you had voted not to close the MRF.
I voted for the operations budget with the 20% 20% surcharge.
I'm still confused.
The MRF vote, the vote to open or to keep or not keep the MRF never came up.
I guess that I have a real concern about that vote on behalf of the town to keep the materials recycling facility open, because the vote specifically that was taken by the board 2 weeks ago was to instruct our representative to vote to not continue operations at the MRF. And I guess that raises a real substantial concern for me about a vote that cast on our behalf to keep it open. It looks to me like there was essentially an 8-8 split in the rest of the towns. 8 to keep it open and 8 to close it. And then our 6 votes were cast to keep it open, which was contrary to what the board had voted last week. So what I'm understanding is that so far the reason you did that is because it was attached to the 20% surcharge. All right.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it. Also, it resolved a number of the other issues that would have come up with the other 2 balances, but primarily because from what the other town representatives have said after conversations with their select boards, none of the other options were going to be accepted.
I have some real concern with the board having voted to instruct its representative to the Solid Waste Management District to cast its votes one way and then those votes being cast another way. Real concern about how we're being represented then on the Windham Solid Waste Management District Board. It wasn't clear to me what happened from reading the newspaper. But now that I understand the way it shook out, I think that I'm also gonna talk with the vice chair about having an agenda item, in the beginning of December about our representative, on the Windham Solid Waste Management District Board, because it sounds to me like, we said to do it one way and you cast the votes another way.
Well,
It's
the
really
problem of
problematic for me.
being, the problem of having 2 hats, as we say, one of the responsibilities is to do what looks like is also, when I'm at that meeting, is also look out for the interests of the Waste Management District. And I think in balancing and looking at what the presentation was and the response to that compared to the response to the others, I think that was the right vote to make.
Well, I think we'll have that on the agenda at the December 6th meeting as well, because my personal view is that you're there as the town's representative, and if the town has said this is what where our interests lie, then, that seems to me that that should be carried through, but we'll put that on the agenda at the beginning of December as well. Any other discussion about the Windham Solid Waste Management District issues? So, Kate,
You had something.
you wanted to say something else, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally different subject?
Yeah, I think we're done with that one.
Yeah, this is on a lighter note. I just want to remind everybody that we're having the open house for James Van Slavin. It's on Sunday from 1 to 3 at 118 Elliott Street, which is the new space across from the fire station. And we would love everybody and anyone who wants to come. And if you want to bring a dessert, please do. Otherwise, there will be food there, but should be nice, and it'll be a great, happy, uplifting celebration about James.
And if you can't make it, have a great Vermont
Day,
day.
that's right.
Anything else under Select Board comments or committee reports? All right, so the next item on tonight's agenda is under public participation. Is there anybody who's in attendance? Yeah, let me do the public participation and we'll come back. Anybody under public participation wants to speak to something that's not on the agenda, Ms. Montgomery? That's all right, we'll come back and do it.
I came before this board, a couple months back to discuss the Highway Art Project and was given some advice to go up and meet with the Travel Information Council. I did that, had a very congenial meeting with them. They seemed to like the project, most of them very much. Basically, they said that they're not I forget the exact terminology they used. They can't advise on something like this. Their role, they deal with enforcement and complaints. So something before the fact, like a proposal, is not really something they can do much with. They did give me statute on what they call the highway sign law, what we call the billboard law. And there were some recommendations that certain parts of that be worked into our proposal, like what the definition of a sign is. And there's some very interesting language around that I won't bother the board with, but learned a lot about the statute, and they were basically encouraging. So I just wanted to report back to you all on that.
Thank you, Ted.
Any questions?
Do we have any questions for right now? Thank you. We look forward to hearing back some more. Dick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention that next Friday, the 25th, will be the holiday tree lighting down at Plenty Park at 6 o'clock. Rumor has it Santa's going to stop by at 5 o'clock. There'll be hot chocolate there, and we're hoping to have some entertainment. So if you get an opportunity, swing down. And last year, I think we had about 125, 140 people there, so it was quite a festive night. Hopefully the weather will cooperate. I think last year was about 65. I don't probably think we're going to get there this year. But if you get an opportunity, swing down. It's really a nice community event. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Anybody else who wants to say anything under public participation or select board comments or committee reports? All right, the next item on tonight's agenda is for us to convene as liquor commissioners. Do we have motion to convene as liquor commissioners?
So moved.
We have motion to convene as liquor commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. So the single item on tonight's liquor commissioners agenda is to consider the Dollar General Marlboro Road request for a second-class liquor license. Peter?
This
Please.
is before you with a recommendation that you approve it, based on the normal review that's done by staff, particularly the police department and the fire department, both of whom have approved this for issuance. We don't actually issue it, as you know. The final action is taken by DLC. But my understanding is that there is a representative
Right, that's what
here
we're saying
that can speak to it. But staff, once you've heard from them, does recommend that you approve the liquor license.
Thank you. If you want to either speak at the microphone, that's for the television, or at the table, your call.
Well, I was under the impression that I'm here to answer any questions you may have. I don't have any-
Well, it's also free publicity.
Yeah, there you go. My name is Meryl Bent. I'm an attorney representing Dollar General in connection with liquor licenses around the state. So here we are in Brattleboro, lovely Brattleboro. So really, you know, the application's complete. It's the same. It's a very similar application to what we submit everywhere. It has all of the information that that DLC is looking for. It's really limited what towns are usually looking for. In fact, Brattleboro is a little more thorough than most towns. But if you have any particular questions that I can assist you with, I'm happy to do so.
Anybody on the board have any questions for Attorney Bent about the liquor license application?
Well, that was easy.
As long as it wasn't snowing on top of the mountain.
It wasn't. It was above freezing. Thankfully.
Excellent. Peter, police and fire have all given their approval?
They haven't. I guess one thing that might be worth noting for the record, because of the comment that we're a little more thorough than some of the other communities where you do this work, I want to reassure the public that just because that it's not an indication of a cursory review, just because every time one of these comes forward, we're recommending approval. We're recommending approval because of the thoroughness of the review that's occurred. So there are times when folks reach a stumbling block and don't decide to proceed. Most of the time what happens when we see an initial application is we just work with folks to make sure that everything is in order, and when it is in order, it's brought forward to you. So just want to make sure that that part is clear to everyone.
Cool. We've actually turned down a couple, or 3 or 4, in the time that I've been on the board.
Oh, yeah.
It's an appropriate thing when they're not meeting criteria or when dangerous conditions are arising. If there's no further inquiry and no further discussion, we're ready for a motion on the Dollar General liquor license application, please.
To approve a second-class liquor license for DG Retail LLC DBA Dollar General Store, number 12210, located at 23 Marlborough Road.
We have a motion to approve Dollar General's Marlborough Road second-class liquor license. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. Thanks for coming. Is there any other business to be heard when we're sitting as liquor commissioners? Ready for a motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners?
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. Next matter on the agenda is under unfinished business. Updates about the police fire facilities project update. Mr. Elwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to note, as I provide the report, that Steve Horton is here. And so if you have any questions about any aspect of this evening, or you'd like to get more detailed information about the construction activity, please feel free to ask that. We'll ask Steve to jump into the conversation. But the update is pretty straightforward. At West Brattleboro, we're proceeding on schedule with no new issues that need any action by the board. All of the windows have been installed. The apparatus bay, slab, and the front apron have now been poured. And the interior rough-in of plumbing, electrical, and mechanical systems is underway. So good progress continues at the site. No major issues there. We expect that over the next couple of weeks that continued interior rough-in of plumbing, electrical, and mechanical systems, the installation of the exterior doors, except for the large doors in the apparatus bay, but all of the ones that people will use to go in and out of the building, will be installed, and the installation of exterior siding and trim, so it'll start to look like a more finished building. There'll still be a lot of work to be done inside, however, in the weeks ahead. There was an issue that was raised both in an email to me and on iBrattleboro, and I circulated some information to the board about this, but I wanted to make sure that we addressed it tonight so that the public would be informed about the process that was ongoing and has now been completed related to addressing questions and concerns about the wall system and moisture control for the building. Back on May 11th, when the Police Fire Facilities Building Committee was reviewing the plans for this building, there were similar questions raised, and both Efficiency Vermont and Eli Gould, who's a member of the committee, indicated an interest in having some continued communication with Steve Horton and the design team regarding the wall system, and particularly how the interior of the wall system would be addressed in terms of how the walls breathe and how moisture would be controlled within the building. That communication has recently occurred, particularly between Steve Horton and Eli Gould, where they agreed on a modification to the original design that would provide a more permeable barrier on the inside. The sheeting on the inside of the wall system will breathe more freely than what had originally been specified. That's what the architect has now issued as an instruction to the builder to modify this system accordingly. And the communication is continuing between the Efficiency Vermont representatives and Eli and Steve regarding the testing procedures that are going to be implemented in coordination with the guidance that's being provided by Efficiency Vermont. There's going to be first some pre-testing and then a blower door test that will occur as the job unfolds to make sure that we seal the building up properly and make it as energy efficient as we can. So that's the report for West Brattleboro. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions about West Brattleboro at this point?
Was it a wind issue or a moisture issue, excuse me?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Wasn't it a moisture issue?
Yeah, the concern about the wall system was that it, if moisture got excessively trapped within the walls, that mold could develop.
Right.
And so, again, it's been reviewed by Steve and Eli with a recommendation to install a more permeable barrier there rather than the plastic that was originally specified, and we believe that should alleviate any of the concerns regarding the mold.
And a little bit more about the test?
The testing, Steve can speak to the details of it, but basically that's making sure that there aren't gaps in the finished system to make sure that air isn't going to escape through the walls and thwart the energy efficiency aspects of the design.
So if the air gets trapped in there, that's going to create the moisture and create the problem? That's what the theory is there?
So Steve, can I put you on the spot?
Yes.
And the original design, was it adequate enough?
The original design was adequate enough. It's a question of building science and
I know.
ever-changing building science.
Right.
And essentially the study has been, in the original design, which we all looked at and thought was adequate, had 6 mil poly on the inside behind the sheetrock. Today's more advanced technology and thinking is, in lieu of trying to keep moisture completely out of the wall, even, by the way, poly has a perm rating of 0.13. It allows 13% of the 7,000 grams per 1 square foot scientific formula through it. The thinking today is, rather than try to keep the moisture out, moisture is going to get in somehow sooner or later, and the idea is to let the moisture out of the wall. So they're inventing new products all the time that are called vapor retarders or vapor barriers. Nothing is waterproof, literally. So today's technology suggests that a product like DB Plus is what we're recommending, would allow the moisture, whatever infiltration there is, which is minimal, but whatever there is, can actually escape back out through the wall. Winter and summer, 2 different conditions, moisture in the equipment bay, not so much moisture in the living quarters. This type of product, however, deals with those variables a little bit better than poly, although the poly has been used tens and thousands, maybe millions of times before, and it is the standard to answer your question about adequacy.
Right.
This is a step up, and it doesn't cost the project anything, and after our research, we feel very strongly that this is a great improvement.
Okay. Is there a lot of static water on the backside of that building, or is there a lot of
groundwater?
Groundwater?
There is some groundwater there.
Well, I mean, we knew that there was some coming off the hill anyways, but,
And we've created a swale there to
Right.
eliminate that water.
and I'm assuming that we have perimeter drain and.
We do, yeah.
Okay, well, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
This is all about condensation. And,
Yeah.
Richard mentioned condensation, and the issue is about moisture getting in the wall. There's a dew point in every wall, and it can either infiltrate from the outside or infiltrate from the inside. The outside of the building has cementitious siding and a 1 inch of rigid insulation, and then it has a Tyvek rain barrier on that. So we're not worried about the infiltration coming from the outside, but we're worried about infiltration from the inside. And what compounds the equation is there's always a steady temperature on the inside, say 60 degrees in the apparatus bay. But outside could be minus 30 or it could be plus 90. So that affects the dew point in the wall. If there's any leakage in the wall, i.e. around windows or that type of thing, then that's where the rainstorms happen. You get warm air, cold air, or cooler air and warmer air, and rainstorms happen within the wall. And that's what we're trying to avoid with the infiltration tests.
Right.
And the efficiency of Vermont is helping us with that. So.
Well, I just want people to be, to realize that if you ask 5 different architects and 5 different engineers
Yes, you will.
on how to waterproof and how to,
Yeah.
vapor-proof a building, you're going to get 5 different answers. And so I just want people to be reassured that, it wasn't an oversight. It wasn't it's opinions, and we all
yes,
know
it
about
is.
opinions.
And again, I support your point of view that everyone has a different opinion.
Exactly.
There isn't. I have no anecdotal evidence of the hundreds of buildings I've worked on that probably use poly or that I've ever seen
Right.
any rot. Nor have I any anecdotal evidence for the new product either. But the new product science is supported with the thinking of Efficiency Vermont and some other folks in our community. And I am an advocate of letting the wall breathe, so I'm also supportive of this.
Right.
But again, the million walls with the poly in them before are still here today.
Mhm.
So.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions about West Brattleboro?
Other than that, it's going good?
Going really well.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule, we're under budget, all the cliches.
Why is that 1 square of roofing not done?
The cupola roof?
Oh, is that where it is? Is that where the cupola's going?
Cupola, rather. Yeah, good question.
Okay.
Thank you.
When do you anticipate, if everything continues on schedule,
To have a
that
fire
the West
truck.
Brattleboro station will be completed and occupied?
End of February.
Really, before town meeting day? Huh?
That's
Coming
next-
up quick.
Town meeting in the.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Tad, you had a question?
He doesn't want you to leave.
Question for Steve. My understanding is that the R value of the walls in that building are roughly 24, is that correct? So I want to express a bit of disappointment that we're barely exceeding code in the wall structure insulating values of this building.
Any other questions or comments?
I would like to hear Steve's rebuttal, if I could.
We're friends, so it's not, I mean, it's just a different, it's where we are with this is cost versus performance. And we were charged by the town to build a cost-effective building that would exceed code, but at the same time, meet all the other requirements involved. And the point is made that the wall section that we have is an R24, the code is R21, so we're roughly 15% over code if we want to look at that statistically. I would argue that we're a little higher than 24 because we're not counting the plywood and the drywall, and so we could even argue 20% over code. But here's the rationale that I present to you. This is again like wall sections. Everyone has a different opinion. We have an R60 ceiling, which is way above code, and that's because heat rises. Heat doesn't go out sidewards. Heat rises, and so to capture the heat or to talk about R value is you have to focus on the ceiling first. And we're spending that extra money to have the R60 ceiling. And then when you look at the wall section, even though we are over code, we have windows that are R2.5, R3 versus R24. So the idea of making the walls more R value when they're right next to an R2.5 or R3, which is the best window you can buy, says that we're exceeding, well, I get that point completely. It doesn't have the payback that we would want to look at as far as performance. heat savings and that type of thing. So it's always a balance act. I mean, if we could build every building with R60 walls and the R100 ceiling, we probably would, but there's been many studies done that anything over R60 is a waste of money. You never get your payback, ever, from heat and cost. So that same analysis is made with the walls. I'm not saying that we couldn't do better than R24 if we spent more money, but the cost versus the performance is always the equation. So.
Yeah, I just want to also, again, reinforce the point that John made earlier, and it's kind of embedded in both of these conversations tonight, that the layers of review and the team aspect of this, the fact that there are multiple folks with great expertise in these areas that are part of the design team and the construction team, as well as your extra set of eyes and ears with the police fire facilities building committee, looking in more detail at these issues than the detail in which we usually address them here, I think is working. And evidence of that is that both of these issues that we've talked about tonight that have raised some level of concern in the community were addressed on May 11th in the review of the building plans for this facility by the Police Fire Facilities Building Committee. So it's not that the questions are unreasonable. They actually are reasonable questions, and there are ways in which different people might have approached this differently. But the questions have been well vetted, and in this particular case, the building committee itself, rather than saying, hey, Steve and Eli, you need to get together and talk about this some more, which was the outcome of the other matter, the building committee looked at it that day and was satisfied that with the extra insulation in the ceiling and a bit more than what was required in the walls, that this was in fact a good balancing of cost and benefit and the right way to proceed with the building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about West Brattleboro at this point? I would think the next item under police fire is central.
Indeed it is, and we're getting started there. You've probably seen the work. There was a good-sized hole there last week, and most of that has been filled in, but there's some trenching around it now, and the site work continues. No major issues there, although we have encountered some unsuitable soils. I know that's been a recurring theme this year, sometimes more painfully than others. I'm happy to report this evening that the unsuitable soils in this particular case were foreseen. This is a site with a lot of history. We couldn't be sure what we were going to find in the excavation, but we were pretty sure we would find some things that wouldn't be proper to leave in there as the ground under the foundation of the building. And so there has been some extra soil that's had to be removed and some additional soil brought in to the site. But because it was foreseen, that was built in. There was a contingency factor built into the guaranteed maximum price for unsuitable soils. And there's no action for you to take. There's no additional cost being incurred for the project. And there's no delay in the work as it's proceeding either, because again, the schedule, like the budget, factored in the likelihood that there would be some additional work required in the excavation.
So no tree roots?
No tree roots.
No tree roots.
Can I inquire, has the excavation there concluded, or is there further excavation to happen?
Yeah, Steve should answer that. There's site work that is definitely continuing. I don't know whether there's any additional excavation to occur.
Under the building footprint for the new addition, that excavation has been completed. We have a few utility lines to run out to the streets, but I don't anticipate anything of major concern.
And so there was environmental work that had to be done at the location, particularly given its location.
Yeah.
My understanding is that there have been a lot of cleaners in that area.
Correct.
And there was concern about potential contamination.
No contamination, actually. It was concrete and the old well, remember the spa that was there? We found the well. It's dry. So it was only 10 feet deep. We dug down 3 or 4 feet. We found the well, including the stone lining and the whole thing. It was a piece of history. We're filling that with slurry concrete. And we found a drill bit auger. Somebody was drilling holes and they got stuck and they left that there. So
I think it's mine.
You can have it. You're welcome to it.
Somewhere.
A half a tank that was completely dry and no residual of oils or anything. Half a tank was probably left from the spa, and some concrete. We found a lot of concrete down there. So that's what we have removed.
So that took some time, but it didn't take a lot of.
We anticipated
Cost.
that kind of stuff. So.
Good. John?
So
Sorry.
I'm just curious about the sewer line.
Yep.
How did we not know it was there?
The broken one? Or
Well, is it one, I just, I'm
There are
hearing it
several.
secondhand,
Yep. There's
is it
several.
still usable?
Yes.
So it was a used line,
Yes.
okay.
What happened?
But did we break
Wait,
it?
can we bring us all up to speed, because I
Yeah.
never heard this before.
I was going to give you the background.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Don't
thought
be
you
sorry.
were- Oh,
There was
Interesting.
an incident last weekend now, a week ago,
right.
10 days ago.
10 days ago, where the chief contacted me on Sunday morning bright and early to say that they had that they had a sewer backup going on. And so we, of course, that Friday before, the site contractor started work, and obvious the answer was the site guy did it. So, I mean, I told him that, but I was wrong. Because what had happened was the sewer line ran parallel behind the back of the central fire station, and some time ago it was actually dug up and repaired a couple months ago, I understand. Well, they didn't get, if they'd gone another 10 feet, they would have found a shear in that pipe, literally. The ground evidently heaved, and it was completely sheared apart. And so that pipe had been for several months just backing up, and by coincidence, it overflowed on Sunday morning after we started. So that Monday morning, I had the DEW folks come over Sunday and lime the pit that the sewer had been dropping. It was very little, to ease any contamination concerns. And then on Monday morning, we dug it up, and we discovered that if they had gone 10 feet more with that earlier repair, they would have seen the problem.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
Not cool, but
Solved.
it is solved.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. All right.
And no delay and no extra cost for the project, so.
so that was repaired by our team?
Yes, that was repaired by our team.
By
Yeah.
Department of Public Works?
That's right. And everything's back in service and the
Great
project's ongoing.
cooperation. The site guy was
Good.
there. He dug the hole.
Oh, super.
DPW fixed it.
Yep.
They put it back. So great cooperation. No finger pointing.
No, good.
So unless there's any other questions about Central, we'll move on to police.
Are we finished with Central? Anybody else have any questions about Central? Police then?
The police report is very brief. Just two updates on process. The bids are in and the guaranteed maximum price is being developed, and that'll get reviewed on November 30th by the committee and on December 6th here at the select board. So hopefully we'll get as good of a result from that bidding process as we got for the earlier two projects, and come in at or below our estimate for the project and get going. So that's nearing completion.
When do we own the building?
Well, and that's the other part of tonight's report is by the end of November, we expect to own the building.
It would be nice.
There's no hiccups there, but
know.
the attorneys have been coordinating the paperwork and getting all the final details together to get ready for the closing. And each of them have also had some competing commitments that have caused the schedule to move along a little more slowly. They both had been shooting for the first half of the month. It's now going to occur in the second half of the month, but the expectation is it will still be done before December 1st. You'll be happy when you know that it has
Yeah, well, it'd
happened.
be
So will we.
nice, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions about police?
I have a question.
Yes, there's buttons.
Yes,
Is there
please.
buttons on the door? No, and this may be, it's gonna make me sound really stupid. Weren't we paying something, or is that just the option on the property?
Yeah.
So this doesn't work into anything? with
No,
the-
once we exercised the option,
We're fine.
where there's no additional cost to the town until we actually close on the property.
Okay,
Good question, actually. Yeah, the delay isn't costing us anything.
okay.
See, that ain't stupid.
Anybody else on the board or anybody else who's in attendance have anything else that they want to say, or any other questions about the progress of police fire facilities work?
I have just one last detail to share
Okay,
with you,
yes,
and
please.
really, in the spirit of full disclosure, showing that we're really trying to be as transparent as possible about all the expenses. No, it's just funny because it's a $4 item, but it's $4 more than what we had told you something was going to cost. And so reported in tonight's report is the fact that we're at $5,004 on the testing work up at the West Brattleboro Fire Station. We actually anticipate that there'll be $500 to $1,000 more testing required. And so we're going to run about $6,000 there for what we had thought was going to be a $5,000 item. We'll close the loop on that once all of that work is done. But I did want to, all kidding aside, assure the select board and the community that we're counting every dollar and reporting it. Anything that gets authorized to be spent that's not authorized here at a select board meeting is being recorded on that log and will continue to be part of the weekly reports.
John, you couldn't have hid that somewhere?
We don't hide things.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further on the police fire facilities project update, the first item under new business is the monthly financial report. John?
Okay, thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. So included in your packet is the October financial report. And as of the end of October, we're a third of the way through our fiscal year. And the general fund is doing well after we make our adjustments for the various semi-annual and annual payments that we make every year, prorate those. The expenditures would be at 30.5% of the budget. So again, under where we would expect to be, and that's a good thing. The utilities fund was at 32%, and the parking fund was at 28.4% of their budgets. And again, if we adjust the sludge removal and interest expense in the utility fund, their expenditures would actually come down to 28.6%. So again, doing well in all of those funds. Solid waste fund, the revenues were at 27.2%, expenditures were at 29.1%. And again, those numbers don't reflect the October revenues and curbside collection costs. The loan report shows that we had $3,442,451 in outstanding loans issued, and 2 of the loans had payments that were overdue. And again, those 2 parties are continuing to make payments. They got behind, but they are continuing to make payments, so we don't feel that there's any real major exposure to us there. They're both pretty small loans to begin with. 1 loan is in default, and that one is fully reserved. The program income report shows that we have $683,190 available for additional grants and loans as of the end of October. So we have a pretty substantial balance in our program income funds. And then finally, the grant report gives you various information on 42 active grants and 9 grants that are in the application process currently. So that's my report. If you have any specific questions on any of the line items contained in any of the reports, I'll certainly try to answer those questions for you. And if not, that is it from me.
John?
John, on the refuse bag revenue, are those holding where we thought the numbers were going to be? Are we above? Are we below? Or
They're close. They're a little below what we had budgeted, not much. And, it may come in a little bit under what we would have expected, but again, not substantial at all. There's a little bit of a underrun at this point in time, but inconsequential, really.
Okay.
But what that signifies is that people are putting less in the garbage stream
Right.
and more in the recycling and the composting. Is that fair
That's
to
what
say?
I'm hoping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we
mean, that
need
could
to
be a
adjust
good
the
sign.
budgets down
Right.
for next year, then we will. I mean,
Yep.
this is a transition period.
Yep.
Can you tell us, please, where we stand in terms of the performance and completion of the audit, if you know?
Well, that's an interesting question. Today, we received, and Peter, I haven't had a chance to tell you this, but today we did receive the final audit, and I have bound copies for you of the audit. We did receive the PDF copy of the single audit. We don't have the bound copies of that yet. And I'm happy to tell you that there were no findings, no significant deficiencies of any kind reported in the single audit. It was a very good audit. And so, starting out with a new audit firm,
Oh, that's right, yes.
we have received this audit substantially earlier than we have had in the past. So our experience, I was a little skeptical at first because their fee structure was so much lower than what we had been paying. And, so I had some concerns on that, but they have come through and it looks good.
That's excellent.
So, based upon your experience dealing with the prior auditors here and in your career doing this type of work, you are comfortable with the scope of the work that was done by the auditors and with the integrity of the report we're getting?
Yeah, they spent less time here than our previous auditor did, but they're the ones that are certifying these audited financial statements. So the testing that they do, they have to be comfortable with the level of testing that they've done to assert,
Because that falls on their shoulders.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and there are different, different auditors have different levels of comfort, and they, as I said, they definitely spent less time here, but I think we showed them that we have good internal controls, and we're able to produce the documents that they were looking for.
Good. So we'll look forward to getting those. Dick?
I too, John, when I saw what the amount of money was for the audit, had concerns even before I got on the board. So that's good to hear. I'm going to give you an opportunity to pat you on the back. I don't believe, since you have been in our employment, that we have had a finding of fact. Am I correct? I know that when I was on the board and you came, we didn't have any findings of fact. I was off for 3 years, and I'm not sure. But I believe that you are pitching a no-hitter, and I want to commend you and your staff for doing that. And people don't realize all the numbers that have to get analyzed and recorded, and that's a testament to you and your staff, and I applaud you for it.
Thank you, Dan.
Go on reserve fund.
Anybody else on the board? Kate?
Yeah, I do, and this is probably more to either Patrick or Peter. Were we gonna do some kind of analysis or something about the parking fund? Or were we gonna put a parking plan, parking?
I think what you're
plan
thinking
together?
of is we do owe you and plan to bring to you shortly. It's probably going to be early in the new year.
Okay.
The information so that you can weigh the potential of doing some energy improvements at the transportation center and a smaller scale improvement at the Harmony lot versus doing a larger scale improvement at the Harmony lot and waiting on the energy improvements. So when you had discussion around all of that a few months back, we assured you that we would bring you additional information so that you could see that choice more clearly and make that choice, and we'll have that for you in the next month or two.
Okay, and when we get that, is it gonna be laid out what the plan is beyond those things? Like how the money is gonna be spent going forward?
Yeah, there had been some other needs identified, and we'll reiterate what those are in terms of some resurfacing that's required at some of the other surface parking lots, but that's, the parking infrastructure inventory is pretty small.
Well, I'm talking more about whether it's the pay and display, pay machines and other things like that. Is that factored in anywhere?
It is, we didn't, I don't believe there's a detailed line item the way you're used to seeing in a capital improvement plan, but we can certainly include that when we bring it back to you. There is a factor for that included in the improvement of the parking lots.
Okay, because it's sort of become an issue downtown. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can, even look at those things.
You mean with the machines itself?
Yeah, with the machines and
Specifically changing out the machines.
yeah, and I'm just wondering, because I don't know how much these machines cost or anything, but if there's a way and if there's a plan to look at that stuff and maybe we can, look at it and make sure people understand
Sure.
that there's a plan, because I think sometimes people don't know that there's even a plan and we all get,
Sure.
concerned about stuff.
Right.
And I think there are some concerns.
Are they down a lot? The machines
Well,
themselves, or?
some of them are down a lot, and there's the issue of credit cards, and again, I don't know
Oh.
how much the stuff costs, it could be way outside of our price range, but those are the concerns that have been popping up from people downtown, so I don't know if we have
Yeah,
any
what I
plans
would
for that.
suggest is that anytime in the next few weeks that we have a conversation so that we can understand more fully what
Yeah.
you're hearing from people on the street.
Yeah.
And we'll just make sure that we address those questions as part of the report that we bring back to you when we have the other information.
That'd be great,
Sure.
that'd be great.
No problem.
So you had your hand up briefly, you're all set now?
I think we're all set.
Okay, so we'll note that the utilities fund budget, the parking budget, and the solid waste budget are all separate now enterprise fund budgets, and they're gonna be approved separately on a different schedule after we complete this budget that is for presentation to town meeting. And so we'll anticipate receiving all those documents about the plans and the long-term planning to the extent that it exists and can be constructed when we get those separate budgets, probably in January timeframe.
Actually,
Maybe February.
the separate budgets will be later into the spring, but
Right.
the specific information that we've just been discussing, we owe you because it's in the current year's budget, and we owe you that so that you can make decisions in the winter so that we can implement them when warm weather comes.
Great.
And so with that, you should expect to see in January.
So two different tracks. We've got
That's correct.
a capital expenditure track, and then we'll get the budgets afterwards.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that I had talked about and was the utility budget and analysis, because I believe that the fund has substantial funds in it, and there's an opportunity for the board to revisit and change the ordinance in whole instead of increasing the budget on a yearly basis. And part and parcel to that was the high debt service payment the first couple of years. And given that you're proposing a 5.5 cent increase on the general fund budget, I do believe it warrants some discussion as to say, okay, because if we don't hold the line in one or the other, it's going to be a significant impact, even though one is, they are separate funds, but the money comes out of one pocket. So I'll be looking for that analysis from you.
Absolutely, and we intend to be doing that also in the first quarter of the year. So before you see the proposed budget for the utilities fund and for the other enterprise funds for going forward into FY18, we'll have conducted that review of the model and see whether or not the board wants to make any changes to the ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions about or relating in any way to the finance report? I think that's how we started
That is where we start.
this discussion. Anything else about finance? Thank you, John, for that report. Next item on the agenda is discussion of the FY18 budget. And tonight, we're going to be doing our overview of the first two topics within the budget, that being the revenues and the capital plan, projects and equipment. And we have an update that was presented to us today with some changes to the capital plan because our oldest fire engine pumper truck didn't pass inspection last week or the week before, and so we have to deal with that sooner rather than later. Peter?
That's correct, and if it's okay with the board, we'll get to that in a few minutes. I'd like to give a very brief overview. It'll run parallel to what we talked about 2 weeks ago tonight, but just to set the stage for the dive we're going to take into the budget this evening and beyond, I'd like to hit a couple of highlights from the overall perspective, and then review the revenues before we get into the capital. And when we get to capital, we'll address very explicitly the changes that are required based on the fire truck situation. And I also want to mention before beginning the overview that the entire management team is here and able to answer specific questions that you may have about any particular department. So whether that is regarding any of the revenue line items or whether that's regarding any of the capital items as we go forward, as we do with most business items here in these meetings, I'll answer if a quick and summary answer is sufficient, but if you want to take a deeper dive into understanding what's behind some of these numbers, then the staff is here and ready to participate. And I would remind everyone again that this is a major undertaking each year, maybe the major undertaking in terms of recurring work that we do from year to year. The document that's before you reflects a tremendous amount of work, hundreds of hours of work, and good work that's been done by everybody in this room in terms of bringing a budget forward that does include a proposed tax increase. But it's a proposed tax increase that is smaller than what was originally anticipated in the rollout of the new debt service that we have to pay for the police fire facilities. And it maintains all existing levels of service that have been previously adopted and implemented by the town. In addition to that, it includes new investments, money beyond prior funding for traffic safety items. That's something we've had a lot of conversation about here at prior board meetings. And we're looking to increase, to maintain the commitment within the capital fund, and increase actually in one particular area for an intersection improvement, and then to increase the sidewalk funding and other funding for traffic safety within the operating fund. We'll get to that on another night when we're talking about the DPW budget. We also are recommending increasing, consistent again with conversations that we've had over many months and in the long-term plan process, increasing commitment to the capital projects and capital equipment replacement. There are energy efficiency improvements, not all, but some of what was recommended in the energy audits earlier this year is included within the recommended budget. And the way that we identified those items were based on the analysis of which ones had the greater payback in terms of cost savings in return for the investment that was required to implement them, as well as those that were opportunistic. So, for instance, the furnace at the library must be replaced. It's worn out. And so there's an opportunity there to include the energy efficiency recommendation in that replacement. And the police fire facilities, we benefit in this budget by the fact that while this will be the peak year for principal and interest, it's going to be a lower peak than what was originally anticipated because of the fact that we got a record low interest rate on those bonds, so that helps. We also had a reduction this year of almost $200,000 in the 2010 series bond cost, and so that was because some of the items that were paid for by that borrowing have run their course now, so there's remaining debt from that series that is going to be paid for years to come, but this is a year when the outlay is significantly reduced, so that helps make some room for reinvesting in capital and some of the other things that we're talking about here. The employee pay and benefit costs are essentially flat. That's the combined impact of $180,000 worth of pay raises offset by $190,000 decrease in the cost of benefits because of the changes that we've made in the health insurance program and in the retirement program, where employees are receiving either the same or better benefits as previously, but at a very substantial cost savings to the town. And we had a larger than normal surplus, as you'll recall, at year end of FY16. That's made some fund balance available that we're recommending be used. We're recommending a greater use of fund balance in this budget than last year, with the lion's share of that being devoted to the capital project and capital equipment increase. The overall impact of what's before you is a proposed tax increase of 5.5 cents or 4.6%. And that number is about $150,000 or 20% lower than the 6.88 cents that was originally estimated back in January when you were making a recommendation to town meeting regarding the FY17 budget and the funding for the police fire projects. So we think it's a good start, but we recognize that tonight and in the weeks ahead, we'll go carefully through each different segment of the budget. We're happy to answer questions that you have. We'll hit highlights along the way. And we look forward to refining this with you between now and the end of January to send a proposed budget on to town meeting.
Anybody have any questions about the overview, similar to what we got 2 weeks ago?
A lot of work.
If there's no questions from anybody on the board or anybody who's in attendance about the overview, Peter, if you want to start talking about revenues.
I would like to do that. Thank you. So these are on pages 1 through 4 of the behind the operating budget tab in your books. The first 4 pages are revenues. I'd like to hit a couple of highlights and then address any aspect of this that you'd like to address in more detail. First, in addition to the taxes line item where the dollars that are shown here reflect what I just described in terms of a 4.6% increase and 5.5 cent impact, the line immediately below that, we're proposing that the budget be increased by $30,000 for meals, alcohol, and rooms. The reason for that is that we've had substantial increase in that area. We want to be careful not to be too aggressive with a budgeted revenue. It's, of course, creates great difficulties if we anticipate that things are going to turn out better than they do. And this is an area that could be volatile, although we hope that with the increases that we've seen in the last couple of years and with the healthy restaurant activity that is occurring in town, that this will be an item that does stabilize and continue to grow. But for this particular year, after collecting $377,000 this past year, we collected $334 the year before that. We think it's prudent to increase the budgeted figure from $320 to $350, which would provide $30,000 of additional revenue. I want to note that the planning fees are also proposed to increase substantially by $20,000. And the reason for that is that we budgeted very conservatively last year. We now have 2 years in a row of collections on that line item that are in excess of $60,000, most recently $66,700. And we think that it's prudent based on that and projects that we know are being considered in the community to forecast a $65,000 collection of planning permit fees in FY18, which would be a $20,000 budget increase over the prior year. On the next page, the 4th line down, these are police department revenues now. The rental income item that didn't exist within the police department before now is there and reflecting the $26,400 of revenue and the $7,200 of upfit reimbursement, both as a result of the reformer lease and the reformer occupancy of 2,200 square feet in that building.
There's also an increase in the police outside revenue. How come that is?
There is. We just did a careful analysis this year of the relationship between the revenue line item and the related expense line item for overtime that is related to these details as opposed to just the general operations. We did that both in the police department and the fire department, and you'll see adjustments that are a little greater than usual. They don't reflect an expectation there'll necessarily be more business. It's just a recalibration of those to make sure they're accurate.
Thank you.
And then on the final page of revenues, on page 4, is where you see the use of fund balance item. We're recommending that be up $185,000. This number will actually change slightly based on the conversation we're going to have later on this evening if you approve that we modify the proposed capital budget in the manner that we're bringing forward because of the fire truck. But in the budget as it was proposed, it's an increase from just under $450,000 use of fund balance to just under $635,000 use of fund balance. The $134,225 is the figure that the select board approved last year as use of fund balance for the smoothing in of the impact of the police fire facility bonds. And this would be the second year of that smoothing. And then there's $500,000 and what is now just under $500,000 recommended as investment in the capital improvement program.
I need to pose an inquiry, if I can, about the fund balance.
Please.
If you could refresh my recollection, what was the, I'd like to know, and it doesn't have to be tonight, what was the 10%
Sure.
set aside for the fund balance last year? And what was the total fund balance over the 10%? And then the same for this year, what is the 10%
Sure.
set aside? And what is the amount that we anticipate having total in the unassigned,
Yep.
unreserved fund balance to think about spending?
Sure. So I could tell you in rounded numbers,
Please.
this year's numbers off the top of my head. I can't do that for last year's numbers, so we will be responsive to what you just asked for, and we'll give you a clear dollar for dollar report of this for the next time. But in rounded numbers for this year, we're at approximately $1.1 million of available excess fund balance, the fund balance that is above and beyond the 10% that would be set aside to meet our guideline. And we're proposing use of about $630,000 of that. So there's approximately $500,000 of that excess fund balance that would remain in fund balance if you approved it in the manner that it's been proposed. And that would be available, the intent there based on the long-term plan that we presented 6 weeks or so ago now, the intent there would be to use that fund balance again for capital investment in next year and a portion of it in the year beyond.
Peter, could you?
Say that again.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I tried to listen, but.
Okay, so
1.1
You were
million.
listening, but you didn't
I-
hear.
Well, I heard, but it didn't.
So $1.1 million
Right.
is what, if you think about it in terms of, there's all the fund balance that's reserved in one way or another.
Right.
And then there's the unassigned fund balance.
Right.
Within the unassigned fund balance, we want to make sure that 10% of our budget is set aside as our
Right.
rainy day fund.
Rainy day,
Yeah,
right.
that for financial security. So when you look at what's unassigned, and then you take 10% of the budget out, so that's about $1.5 million, better, $1.6
Right.
million or so comes out. The remaining amount that would be available to be used either as a balancing number
Right.
or to reinvest in capital would be about $1.1 million. I can tell you the exact
So we have.
number.
2.7
We have
million?
quite a lot in our.
$2.7 million in the bank.
Yes.
Above whatever's
That's
reserved.
a lot more than last year.
That's because of the substantial surplus that we had on June 30th of this year.
This year's surplus was how much? Was it 830? Is that what I recall? or something like
Yeah,
that?
just about $900,000.
All right, so I'm just going to note now at the beginning of this discussion that I fully am on board with the increase in capital spending that's proposed as part of this budget and the long-term planning that we're doing. But as you and I have discussed, the police fire project also represents a substantial investment in the town's aging infrastructure. And so we really are making a very, very solid commitment to responding to aging infrastructure needs here at the town level, both in an increased capital plan or investment in the capital plan, and then at least as compared to last year, and while simultaneously investing in the police fire infrastructure. I know that there are other uses we could reasonably make of essentially the $470,000 fund balance that would be left over after we put $634,000, if that's what we decided to do. And I know that the tax increase that's presented in this budget is lower than what was presented when we went to the voters with the police fire bond issue in the earlier of the town meetings last year, or maybe early this year. Early this year. Nevertheless, to the extent that we're able to come in lower than the 5.5 cent tax increase by using some more of that fund balance, I'm going to be in favor of doing that.
Good.
And I know that you hesitate about that because then you're left in the outlying years with a gap if you want to maintain a gap in funding, if you want to maintain that level of investment. And I understand that. And we've got plenty of other needs. Nevertheless, there's also at least the argument to be made that because we've been doing a very good job managing the town's business, you've been doing a very good job managing the town business, you all have been doing a very good job managing the town's business. We got a lot of money in the bank because we paid more in taxes than we needed to. That's at least the argument. And my preference going forward is at least to consider how far we can bring this 5.5 cent tax increase down. And yeah, I understand. You know, you're gonna counter, and this is gonna be what we're talking about through the beginning of January.
Week after week, there's no question about that. And I won't speak long about it tonight. I do want to just remind everyone, and we've had this conversation in every budget conversation that we've had. The danger in that, I don't disrespect that point of view at all, and particularly because we had such an extraordinarily large surplus this past year that it begs for that conversation to occur again as part of this budget process. The danger is that whenever fund balance is used for whatever good reasons, you know, in terms of the impact of the police fire debt service or other reasons, it puts us in a position where unless we're willing and able to have a lower budget next year than the one that we're approving this year, we'll have to not only make up the, you know, not only pay for whatever incremental increase there may be, but make up the loss of real-time revenue, current revenue in the given fiscal year for the fact that we drew down the savings account. So that is why I would ask that if you are going to give consideration, or when you do give consideration to using more than this proposed amount of fund balance, that we look really hard at the out years of the capital plan at where you might be willing to defer addressing certain needs and have those needs addressed, you know, lesser or later, because unless we have another surplus that's greater than expected, you know, we would find ourselves having made this year more comfortable at the expense of next year's planned expenses.
And I totally agree with that, because preventative maintenance and all this stuff comes into play. But since I've been on the board, I have never seen a year where we haven't met our 10% by a lot. So, you know, and I know it's nice to live in that fear a little bit, but I also think that we raised that money on the backs of the taxpayers. So, and living in town for 40 years, for 39 years, I've heard about our tax rate and about how much, and I know it costs money to run this town, but I also know that at some point, you know, we have to make it a little bit easier on the people that are living here. And I know you're a bean counter, you know, you're another bean counter over there. I mean, you're looking at that holistically, you know, and at the bottom line, and fear of if something goes wrong. I'm looking at it as, okay, well, we've got a little extra here, let's try to do something. It's all good, you know, we're doing good with everything that we've done. And again, kudos to everybody that, every year I say this, you know, for those people to put this budget together and always come in with great numbers. But that was an amazing amount of money that I think was left over from last year. You know, it's left over, but it's, you know, and I just want to put it to as best use as possible. So I'm always arguing for giving it back. You're gonna always argue for, let's look forward. I live for today. I'm sorry.
Maybe just clarify one quick thing. I know others are waiting to talk, but I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood. So I'm not suggesting that we sit on it.
No,
I'm suggesting that when we use it, we invest it in capital improvements
exactly.
for the benefit of the taxpayers who paid the excess taxes. So I get that it was,
But they
we
don't see
collected
that.
more last year than we thought we were going to
Right.
need. And my suggestion would be that then when we have that kind of a opportunity that those surpluses present, that we invest that money in capital one-time needs rather than in
Right.
in continuing operating expenses.
But
That's all.
residents don't see the capital. They see this number right here at the end, the 5.7% increase, or whatever it came out.
4.6.
Yeah,
Yep.
you
In
know,
tax.
so that's what they look at. You know, and I don't blame them, because that's what affects them on a yearly basis, is that tax increase, or if we can level fund it, that's great, you know, but, and again,
understand.
that's why you're here, because you have to look into the future, you have to, and you've made us wiser for the last couple of years to do that, so.
Anybody else on the board right now? Dick?
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, a few things. Keep in mind that a couple of years ago, when we were talking about this, we agreed to spend to take a little bit out of that fund in order to have a 0% increase for a year, because we knew that this was coming. So keep that in mind, and we had a nice deficit, or a nice surplus, despite not raising taxes that year. So it's hard to project what any of this is gonna do.
Right.
But, and all of this right now is based on the grand list staying the same.
That's correct.
So I don't know when, at what point we can get an estimate of what the grand list is gonna be or change to anticipate what those revenues might mean. And typically, John, as you know, I'm kind of right on the edge of where you are in terms of let's take a little bit of that and move it over here, because do we need the whole 10%? But because of the direction that Peter's going in terms of making up for lost time, or maybe not the wisest, given what happened to our pumper, maybe not the wisest savings, and the commitment to not borrow for anything if we can avoid it, even at the 2% we're talking about, unless it absolutely has to happen. I'd like to see, as David said, I'd like to see a little bit of the 500,000 come out and go toward the taxes, but I think we need to recognize what we've been doing with the tax
Right.
rate over the last couple of years, which is really keeping it pretty stable. And we're gonna be avoiding, and again, people don't necessarily see that, but we're gonna be avoiding a lot of unnecessary financing costs if we can pay cash for things.
Dick?
Several questions. When I look at the total on revenue on page 4, it's $941,481.
Increased.
Increase. And then when I look at, on page 3 of the bottom line for 188, where you have property taxes, rooms and meals, and I look at other revenue, which I would make the assumption that that's that 941 figure, why does that say 1.4?
I'm not sure where you are on the.
Over here on your
It's in
narrative.
the introduction.
Okay. Let me go
The
back.
numbers don't add up for me,
Okay. Just a second.
where you have rooms and meals at 350, you have transfers out at 308, and then you have use of fund balance,
Yes.
then you have other revenues.
Other revenue is literally everything that's not one of the other four. So the property taxes number correlates to a line in the, actually a couple of lines that are in the revenue details. Rooms and meals to one particular line.
Right.
Transfer to from other funds is 4 lines that add to that 308, and the use of fund balance is one particular line. So those you can look at and understand exactly how you get to them. The $1,437,920 of other revenue is literally all of the other 100 or so line items added together. It's everything that's not in the 10 or so line items that account for the first 4. So it's really hard to look at that and
So
balance it.
when I'm back on line 4, I see that the, what's the justification for the transfer on the utilities fund to increase it by 10,000? And then the parking fund, which has had surpluses, that was at 36,000, and you have decided to decrease that by $900.
Sure. Thanks for raising that. Actually, I meant to describe that in the overview, and I overlooked it. There had been a figure used for years that was a recurring number that was used related to, as you see, actually, if you look back at the actuals for 2015, it reflects the historical usage of, for a bunch of different more precise splits of this overall transfer for several different types of services. Those hadn't been analyzed for quite a long time, up through 2015 or so. And so this was before I got here, but it was a really nice piece of work that Patrick and John did as part of preparation of the FY16 budget, was to carefully calibrate what services are actually provided by the general fund to the enterprise funds of the town, so that the transfer could be in relation, be a direct reflection of what the general fund subsidy would be, what the taxpayers' subsidy would be to those enterprise funds if the transfer wasn't made. So I can't account for how the old numbers that totaled up to over $500,000, what those actually, but if you take the transfer from capital, which was a one-time anomaly back in 15, it would still be $220,000 were what had been the traditional transfer in those various line items. I can't account for exactly how those were identified years ago, but what I can tell you is starting in 16 and for the 3 years, that year, the next year, and this year that we propose, these represent the actual calibrated expenses that are incurred by the general fund for the services that are provided. For instance, paying the bills, processing the payroll, in some cases, providing other more direct services, less administrative and more direct services to the enterprise funds. So that careful analysis resulted in a $250,000 transfer from the utility fund to the general fund in 2016, and a $36,900 number for the transfer from the parking fund. We last year looked at the didn't do a recalibration again. It had only been done months before, but what we did do was look at inflation. We were going to increase it by whatever was the prevailing rate of inflation for the year, and prevailing rate of inflation was like 0.1%, and so we just left those numbers flat in the proposed FY17 budget. This year, instead of doing an inflationary increase, we said, well, if we do that over time, we're going to get further and further out of whack again. Let's just run the model. The model had been created. The hard work of that effort was in the creation of the model to make sure that we were accounting for the right expenses. So if we run the new budget through the old model that had been calibrated, we would come up with what would be the fair transfer for this year. We did that, and it resulted in a $10,000 increase for the transfer from utility and a $900 decrease in the transfer from parking. It's not based on the revenues that are generated by those two operations, but rather based on the degree to which they rely on the operations of the general fund.
And so you're saying that the work in the parking fund has decreased on the finance department?
I believe it's actually, in that case, and John will correct me if I'm wrong, it's that the debt service on the transportation center has decreased, and that's affected this number. Is that correct?
No, what we do is we look at the common expenses between all three of these entities, whether it's legal fees, whether it's finance department, the town manager's department. And we identify all of those expenses, and then we allocate them between the three entities based on their total budget. So we add all three budgets together, and then we allocate those costs based on their portion of that total of those three entities' budgets. And what happened here is the parking fund's budget actually went down,
Right,
and the utility fund budget actually went up.
right.
So that's why we had one going down and one going up. It's the allocation of the expenses.
I think the parking fund went down primarily because of that debt service, though, didn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah,
That is true.
okay, that's where-
That's what you were talking about.
The dots
yes.
connect, yeah, so, so we would strongly recommend that we follow this, that we do this exercise. I think it's critically important that we do the exercise. If the board wants to give consideration to some other amount of transfer as a reflection of the fact that, above and beyond services provided by the general fund, that there are revenues generated that may be more than what is needed, that's not so true in the parking fund, but an argument could be made in the utility fund for that, but you'd want to be very careful about that, especially since we're going to be giving consideration shortly to the possibility of reducing the amount of rate increase that was forecasted within the utility fund. You wouldn't want to be taken from both ends. You would want to increase the expense as a transfer into the general fund and then also level off the revenue into the utility fund, because then we might have insufficient funds in the future for the utility operations.
Now, thank you for that. I come from a little different place than David. I'm not as enthusiastic when I was looking at capital expenditures for this year. And I'm really going to have a hard time supporting spending $215,000 in this facility. I understand that you're committed for the $280,000 for life safety phase 3, but the energy saving measures here, when the board hasn't come to a conclusion as to whether we're going to stay in this facility or move out, I think this is premature to put this in the capital budget at this time. I also have some other issues, and I don't know when we're going to start, if this is the time we're going to talk about capital, or if there's another, this is just an overview of the capital, and we'll get into this deeper at another point.
I want to deal in terms of process.
Okay.
We haven't had yet Peter's presentation specifically about capital. So those comments
Okay. I will
about
hold them.
whether we should be putting $215,000 into energy improvements here is premature.
Okay.
Anything else would be timely, I would think.
Thank you.
You're all set then?
On revenues.
On revenues
Yeah.
at this point. Other questions about revenues right now? Is there anybody who's in attendance?
Just a clarification, when do we know about the grand list? At what point do we?
It hasn't gone up very much in the last 10 years.
Well, it went up 1% or so last year.
Russell, that's a good way to.
I think what the,
Is there a trend, a 1% trend? Is there any?
It usually goes up between 0.7% and 1%.
I think what the assessor is saying to you is that,
Stick with what we got.
is that any
plan there.
increases in the grand list are not going to materially impact the tax rate. Is that what I'm seeing? Yeah, both of them, the assessor and the planning
One of
director.
these
Even
years it
with all
could
these
surprise
small
us.
business loans and improvements that we're supporting.
All right, any other questions about revenue? Alrighty then, I guess that we're ready next for, if you would just point out that we had some analysis about whether, I'll just say it, we had some analysis whether there was a potential for additional revenue in the rec programs. And we were looking, at least we had talked about looking about whether we are, to what extent we are subsidizing rec programs for residents and then for non-Brattleboro residents. And the analysis that I understand was conducted was that we did a survey of other rates that are charged by other municipalities. And before even getting into whether we subsidize non-residents' recreational activities and whether by subsidizing non-residents' recreational activities, we're actually making recreational activities available for Brattleboro residents. That whole analysis was short-circuited because at this time our rates are just as high or higher than any nearby communities for recreational programs. And so we can have a broad-based discussion about the extent to which we want to be subsidizing recreational activities through the tax dollars that we raise. But we didn't start doing an individual assessment, as I understand it, of how residents and non-residents are paying their fees. Is that fair?
Everything up to that last sentence, but I'm not going to try to address that. I just didn't really understand exactly what you meant about the last sentence. But everything else you said was accurate. And in fact, in the budget notebook, there is, back in the exhibits, the results of that work. And because we are so clearly the highest in the area, that we in a couple of different categories are tied for charging the most to non-residents, but in every other category are clearly charging the highest fees for non-residents, and in some cases charging fairly substantial fees where other people don't charge fees at all to non-residents. Yeah, we looked at that and we said, well, what we don't want to do is discourage non-resident participation to where it would diminish the quality of the recreation programming for town residents that are participating. And we already collect a substantial amount of revenue from the non-residents compared to what is normal for a recreation department. And for that reason, we didn't go further in analyzing very precisely what might change in particular programs, but instead our recommendation to you is that for this year, we not change the fees that are charged to non-residents.
In my last sentence, that's what I meant, but it wasn't.
Well, we could try a novel approach and reduce our non-resident fees and try to increase our number by getting more participants. And one thing I think that you would find is that our programs are being hurt by the excessive fees that are being charged because people aren't coming here. And so when we talk to Carol and you start talking about the number of participants, they have dropped drastically over the years. And I think part and parcel to that is that our non-resident fees, obviously there's other factors too, but I think our non-resident fees have had a huge impact on people coming to Brattleboro to play the different activities that we offer. And maybe we need to take a closer look and say, maybe we can get more people coming in to do our programming if we lowered our non-resident fees. I understand that, the facility's there, the program is going. The goal is to get as many participants as we can because the fewer hurts the overall programming for the programs in Brattleboro. It's pretty hard to play baseball when you only have 7 kids on a team, or basketball when you only have 6 kids on a team. And I have seen that as someone who has been involved. And I think that when we have Carol here, I think that fee structure is going to have, I think that has had an impact on us. And
She's here, and we can discuss that further tonight, or we can discuss it further on the recreation budget, whatever the board would like.
Carol comes here.
Yeah.
Well, Carol's here, but I think that we're going to reserve this topic for when we're talking about recreation. Sure. Okay. If that's okay.
Oh, Carol just wiped her forehead.
Any other questions about revenue? All right, capital plan, please.
Sure. So if you turn to the capital tab, here we do have some changes, and I apologize that this is going to be a little convoluted. So what I guess I'll do before providing the overall summary is bring the public up to date about what the board learned today from me based on some news we got last week and some work we did to address a newly urgent need for the town. So what I'm talking about is a fire engine that we knew was old and we knew was deteriorating and would have to be replaced sooner than we had previously forecast, which was 2020. But we certainly didn't expect that it would have to be taken off the road immediately, literally overnight. But it failed its inspection. It's our reserve pumper. It's a $500,000 vehicle, and the frame is cracked and the rust is so severe in the body that it didn't pass its inspection, and we were required to take the vehicle off the road. We'll be back to you once you've had a chance to hear this tonight and give it initial consideration along with the rest of the capital requests. We'll be back to you on another evening to address more specifically disposition of that vehicle and the replacement process. But what we have done is we took a look at the capital plan as we had proposed it just 2 weeks ago, and obviously the sacrifices that would have to be made to take $500,000 out of that plan to buy a pumper would be very severe. It would be affecting multiple different other requests that have benefit to the community in various ways, most of which is addressing needs that have been recognized as being overdue and needing to be addressed. And so we couldn't just do that. We had a very healthy discussion about the fleet and the number of vehicles we have and why we have the number of vehicles we have and what purposes each different large apparatus serves within the fire department to respond to different types of calls, but most particularly responding to fires. While there are very important services that are provided by the department in incidents that don't involve fire, the greatest demand that's placed upon the department when it rises to the occasion and addresses severe emergencies is when a building's on fire. And so we need to not only bring the right number of people to the scene, the right equipment to fight the fire, we need to have the right capacity in that equipment to pump enough water onto the fire and so on. We could meet national standards for a community our size, serving the population that we serve, and based on other factors, we could meet national standards for the number of pumpers if we had just 3. But those 3 wouldn't provide sufficient pumping capacity to provide the amount of water that we need to provide to meet the national standards for how much water you put on a major structure fire. Likewise, so there's that. So that's why we have been maintaining 4 pumpers. We used to have 6, and then we had 5, and now we have 4. And there was a time when I actually believed that, based on the fact that 2 of those are in reserve and 2 of them are frontline units, that we could go down to 3 pumpers. But I'm satisfied from the review that I've conducted with the chief and the assistant chief and the information that they presented to me about why we have 4 and how that is reduced from the 6, that it would be imprudent to go to 3. We would leave ourselves more heavily dependent upon mutual aid, even for early response to a structure fire, and I think that would be a mistake. But we still were concerned about this $500,000 surprise, and the department came up with a recommendation I thought was very creative and provides us a way that certainly doesn't eliminate the pain, but certainly significantly reduces the pain of having a surprise like this pop up at the end of a budget preparation process. And that is that we also have a rescue unit that's in our fleet of 6 major apparatus for the fire department. There's 4 pumpers, 1 ladder truck, and 1 rescue unit. The rescue unit carries on it all the different types of rescue-related equipment that would be used both at a fire scene and at other kinds of emergencies. So extrication equipment for motor vehicle accidents and other types of non-fire incidents like that. Some of that equipment is used very regularly, and some of that equipment is used only occasionally. And so the department recommended to me, and I am recommending to you, that we take out of the long-term capital plan the replacement of the rescue unit and take out of the long-term plan the replacement of this reserve pumper and proceed with a purchase of a combined pumper rescue. We'll take our fleet of 6 very large vehicles, 5 of which are $500,000 vehicles, and the ladder truck is $1 million vehicle. We'll take that fleet of 6 down to 5. We'll save in the long run approximately $500,000 of capital cost, freeing up some funds to be able to address other needs in the next 4 or 5 years as we go through implementing the capital improvement program. And we'll address the need for the quantity of water to still be able to be pumped at the fire scene. So the overall impact of this will be maintaining the level of service to the community at a substantially reduced long-term capital cost. That doesn't make it easy, however. It doesn't make that piece of work finished, despite the fact that I think we've arrived at a really good answer to the challenge, because it would either displace $500,000 worth of investment someplace else in this budget, or, and we're going to recommend to you the alternative, or we would borrow money for this piece of equipment. We've talked a lot here about not borrowing for rolling stock, for vehicles. And it is best to not do that, particularly with the smaller vehicles, or with, say in the case of dump trucks, those that are larger and somewhat more expensive, but are recurring frequently enough that every year or almost every year we're buying one. That becomes then, part of the carrying cost of operating town government. And when we borrow for those, we just incur an interest cost that increases the cost of town government at the expense of having it felt like it wasn't costing as much in a given year. So we've stopped borrowing for vehicles over these last few years, and that's a good thing. We should continue to only borrow for vehicles under unusual circumstances, and I would suggest that this moment represents unusual circumstances in two different ways. One is the emergency timing of this, but frankly, if not for the second issue, I think we'd need to weigh that out and look at the other items on this list and think about whether we wanted to reduce cost elsewhere in order to afford this vehicle. But the other aspect is for the fire engines in particular, it's really not irresponsible to borrow if you're getting favorable rates. We've done some checking with the banks. There is interest. There'll be competition for this note. And the expected rate that we would be paying would be in the neighborhood of 2%. As of right now, it would actually be less than 2%. We've done a forecast for the budget that assumes an interest rate that would be slightly higher than 2%, just to be cautious about that. So we might be able to do a little better than the $65,000 number that's identified here. But our recommendation would be that since this vehicle is expected to last for 20 years and costs more than $500,000, $550,000 to buy the combined pumper engine, our recommendation would be that we borrow the funds from a bank to buy the vehicle. That'll cause us to incur a $65,000 debt service cost for each of the next 10 years in FY18 and each of the 9 that follow. We'll pay a total over the decade of $650,000 approximately to buy the $550,000 vehicle. But because that vehicle has such a long life, it'll still be in the middle of its life and in good shape when we're done paying for it. So we think it's a responsible way to proceed. If we follow that path, then in order to accomplish that and not increase the overall budget from what was proposed a month ago or 2 weeks ago, we would need to find $65,000 worth of savings elsewhere, and we believe we have found that. So $40,000 of it comes from the fact that we are going to be able to accomplish the sprinkler work in this building, the fire sprinkler work, for approximately $40,000 less than what we anticipated. We don't have a final figure on that yet. We hope to actually be back with a bid award on that for your consideration on December 6th. But subject to some tweaking and being not quite exactly $40,000, we'll be in that neighborhood of savings for that. That money was being spent from the appropriation 2 years ago by town meeting that was earmarked for expenditure on any one or combination of 4 separate capital improvements. I won't go back into all that history and what the other 3 were, but the 4th was the municipal center life safety improvements. That's all we have left from that list of 4 things, and there is still money in the fund from that appropriation. So that will cover the cost of the sprinkler project, and the $40,000 savings can then be applied along with $35,000 that already was going to roll over to be the final use of that appropriation from the 2015 town meeting. There'll be $40,000 more that can apply towards the phase 3 life safety improvements here in this building. That won't bring down, and on this particular piece of this, I misspoke in the email to you earlier today, so I want to be careful there's not a misunderstanding here. That won't actually reduce the $280,000 cost. We believe it will cost $280,000 to do the phase 3 work. But what it will do is increase on the summary that's on page 1 behind the capital budget tab. It'll increase the line that's shown as use of remaining FY15 RTM designated funds. That number will increase from $35,000 to $75,000. So the bottom line benefits by the $40,000 savings, but it benefits because of an increased use of capital fund balance rather than by reducing the cost of the project. So just a clarification there. The other thing that we would recommend in changing the capital program is the removal from this year's program of the thermal imaging camera. That was a fire department expense of $14,000. They have working cameras right now. It is important. They're getting old, and it's going to be important for us to replace them, but that's not an urgent item, and so we'd recommend that that be removed. Those two things together will reduce the transfer from the general fund to the capital fund by $54,000. So instead of being $1.5 million transfer, it would be a $1,446,000 transfer. Where does the other $11,000 come from? It'll come from the operating budget within the fire department. We'll address that on the fire department's evening if we proceed with further consideration of this as it's brought forward to you tonight. But it's representing an $8,500 software package that was going to be purchased that we'll forego for this year and consider again next year, and a variety of very small reductions in other line items throughout the fire department budget in order to have this balance out to what was originally proposed for the bottom line.
Anybody on the board have any questions about that?
You got an hour?
Go ahead.
Is this going to come up again more specifically? Or is this?
Oh, yeah, no. Well, first of all, let me say my expectation, it's up to the board, but my expectation is that you'll make no firm and final decisions tonight on any of this. And in the weeks ahead as we go through, we'll flag issues that need some amplification and some additional information. And then it's going to be in January that you make your decisions about exactly what's going to go forward to town meeting.
We'll ask a couple questions, but hopefully we'll be brief. The first one is it, why would we not want to just continue to rely on municipal aid or mutual aid for that service? Most of the towns around here depend on mutual aid for a whole range of things. And if we have 3 pumpers already, couldn't we just leave that out of our inventory?
What we're finding actually is that our larger neighbors who have a longer travel time to get here are able to meet mutual aid needs for the smaller communities around them, and when we have a major incident here in Brattleboro, just as we do for the smaller communities around us, and when there's a major incident in the larger communities that are more distant. The smaller communities are struggling to maintain enough volunteers to be reliable, and we are concerned that if we don't respond enough of our own people and the proper equipment in the first instance, that it may be that the help from others may be delayed sufficiently that we would have worse outcomes, consistently worse outcomes in Brattleboro.
And the other question is about the combination pumper rescue truck. I'm wondering, since there are very different functions, what compromises does a vehicle like? I'm thinking about the Chevy El Camino, which was supposed to be ride like a car and be really comfortable, and also have a big bed in the back, and it turned out to have the worst features of both, and hardly any redeeming features except a great big V8 engine.
There's a bunch of El Camino drivers out there that would disagree.
Sure, there are probably Edsel drivers that would disagree with this. Anyway, but are there compromises in getting a combined vehicle?
We're certainly going to, excuse me, have to look at our operations differently than we do now. One of the things we have talked about, and Peter mentioned early in his presentation, equipment that we use regularly versus equipment that we use periodically. We've already acquired a trailer from Public Works that we're going to convert into moving. Whether this happens or not, we're going to move some of the equipment off that rescue truck because it's too heavy, especially for the condition the truck's in. So the compromise is all of the rescue equipment won't be on one vehicle. Some of the stuff that we don't use regularly will be in a trailer that we just, when we need it, we hook onto it and take to the scene. So if that's a compromise, that's the difference in what we're doing now.
But then the other aspect of Dave's question is the combined pumper rescue truck an animal that gets used regularly in other places? And is that something that we can rely on as a solid vehicle?
Right. The rescue pumper is now becoming a very common vehicle in the fire service. It's a little bit longer than a traditional pumper and has more compartment space, and it will be run as a frontline first due engine. Only it'll have all the equipment that presently a traditional engine has on it, along with some of the rescue equipment that we now carry in the rescue truck. And it should serve us just fine.
Do you need a bigger building to put this in?
We planned for this.
Dick, you had a question?
Yeah, this is kind of presented as it's an emergency issue. And the reality is this truck here, if it was approved, we're not going to get it probably for a year and a half.
That's correct.
And so we're going to survive without this truck one way or another. And so we will be depending upon mutual aid.
Correct.
I have always had concerns with the size of our rescue vehicle. I've been on record as to say, at some point, the size of that vehicle, it is going to have an accident because it is so big, the way it barrels around the town. And, a combination use for this vehicle, the wear and tear, our rescue vehicle is out several times a day. In fact, I will ask you when you come before us again to give me the figures of how many times the rescue truck is out per day, per week, all the accurate numbers. And the wear and tear that vehicle is going to have on it, just from the rescue use, tells me that it's not going to last 20 years. I think the last time we bought a rescue vehicle, I think the cost was like $140,000, I think, for the one that you have now. You'd have to correct me, but that's a number that's floating around in my head. The other issue that I have goes to the budgeting process. And all of a sudden, we don't need the thermal imaging camera, and yet it's in the capital plan. And oops, we've got something else, so we can take this out. And so my question is, I have an expectation that when the administration is giving me the capital or the operating budget, it's absolute stuff that we need, and everything else is on a need-be basis and is put off to the year that we would want to purchase it. And all of a sudden this pops up and I start looking at this, and you're going to take $14,000 out of that, and then you're going to go on the operating budget and you're going to reduce that by $11,000. My question is, why wasn't it reduced $11,000 before it was given to us? And so the reality is, when I sit here, and I'm a big supporter of all the department heads, all the departments, I always have been, but I have these issues that come up with me and go, God, something happened, and all of a sudden we just write this off, and it's not as important as it was beforehand. And so when you're giving me this, I'm saying, okay, we need to get that camera. And, when I'm looking at some of this other stuff, that we'll get into later on, I'm saying, okay, is there a need? Is there an absolute need? We have 15 letters for sidewalk improvements in here. And so I can see that we do that and we reduce paving to give that $50,000, and I'll talk about that later on also. But I do have concerns about the way that we go about doing this and the integrity of which I believe that we should be presenting our budget as, you know, we try to do it as bare bones, but we had an $800,000 surplus. And John is right. I mean, how do you get an $800,000 surplus? And so, is it overkill in our operating budget? And then there's other factors that go into it, but we have some huge expenses with debt service, and all of a sudden I see this here, and I'm going, you know, the justification in a year where this huge capital hit on us is really going to be hard to swallow without moving things out or reducing or shifting things around.
So there's general question relating to budgeting and the need for the items that are included in the capital plan, and then specific inquiries about a couple of items in the capital plan. I guess if you want to respond in general first, and then Mike can speak to the thermal imaging camera and the software package that are getting put off, that would be a useful way to proceed.
Sure. If it's okay with you, I'd like to speak to those as well, and he can amplify if you'd
That's
like.
fine,
But
yeah.
You said
He
it.
stood up, that's fine.
I understand. You said it exactly right when you said that not as important. Exactly right. So the thermal imaging camera and the software are not as important as the need that we now have emerged, that has emerged suddenly for us to replace the pumper sooner than what we had expected. As to the overall, and so rather than just come to you and say, you know, we've had to take a pumper off the road, it's going to be a $500,000 expense. If we borrow, it's going to be $65,000, and we need to add that to this budget. What we did instead was look for where we could find savings of $65,000 so that the overall budget that we proposed to you would remain, the total impact of it would remain the same. And so we looked at what would be responsible places to cut things that I think are well justified. I think that the software is going to create operational improvement in the fire department that will be valuable to the town, but not as important as replacing a pumper that when we don't have that pumper, we're reliant on mutual aid that we're not certain is going to arrive in a timely manner. So that's on that piece. And then on the thermal imaging camera, they're old. There is better, newer technology available. They're both still operational, which is why, you know, reluctantly, based on this unfortunate set of circumstances, we've said, well, we should take that piece out and wait until next year for it. But in the absence of this emergency with the truck, we would have felt very comfortable defending the recommendation for the thermal imaging camera based on the fact that the technology has advanced so much, and it's not the kind of piece of equipment you want to wait until it breaks. You want to be replacing it when it gets old so that you have something reliable to use at a fire scene. So as to the overall integrity of the budget question, I would say I think that response to the specific question is representative of the way that we make choices. So there's a whole lot of things we would have loved to have recommended, especially in the area of capital, where, you know, I think it's pretty universally accepted, have a lot of catching up to do. Maybe not everybody agrees with that, but I certainly think it's unfortunate that we can't afford to spend even more than this to catch up to our capital needs and then get to a stable operation. It's going to take us years to do the catch up to where we can then get to just a stable maintenance mode of keeping, you know, the fleet getting replaced before things completely wear out and die like this fire truck, and where we repair buildings to keep them in good working order rather than just when, you know, there's significant failures to building systems. So that's going to take time, and it's going to take investment. what we are trying to do in this budget, and we'll always try to do, is bring you as lean as possible of an operating budget as we can, so that we're providing the desired set of services in a cost-effective manner. There's always going to be choices to make there. There's always going to be some reasonable difference of opinion about priorities of something that maybe deserves a little more funding and something that maybe can live with a little less funding. It's the nature of this process, and it's a healthy process. But on the operating side, I think this is a lean budget, and I think that we will always try to bring you a lean budget. I wouldn't suggest that this is a lean capital request. It's a significantly increased capital request because I think the community needs that now and will continue to need it over these next several years.
Unless there's further discussion at this time about the proposed change in the capital plan to deal with the combined pumper rescue truck, I'd like to ask you please to then transition to talking about the capital plan as a whole.
Can I just put
Yeah,
one thing on the
yeah.
table? I don't need the answer right now. But how many times we've used the reserve pumper, since it's called the reserve pumper, and how many times mutual aid has helped us out?
If you can answer that right off, Mike,
Oh.
that's great.
I can't give you numbers, but reserve pumper, because it's called a reserve pumper because it's not run every day. Engine 3 and engine 4 are used every day. When there's a call, engine 3 goes out of Central, engine 4 goes out of West B. Engine 1, which is downtown, and engine 2, which is up in West Brattleboro, they're used when we have simultaneous calls. So they're turned to reserve pumper, but it's not something that sits there until something breaks down. They're used on a regular basis. So to give you an exact number without doing a whole lot of research, I can't give you that number, but they're used.
I just want to make sure that I've understood something from you correctly, because if I have, it'll be an important point. Simultaneous calls of smaller magnitude or a single call of larger magnitude. So if you've got a structure fire, if somebody's house is on fire, you're going to send all 4 pumpers to that
All of our
scene.
vehicles go, yes. Right.
Now, we only have one, is this one reserve pumper? Because you just said reserve pumpers that we have.
We have two pumpers, 2 engines at each station.
Okay.
Engine 3 and engine 4 are always the first 2 to go out, and then the other 2 are used either if we have a large incident, a working fire, or simultaneous calls.
Okay, and this is the one that would go out if there was, like, this is
Second.
this is number 2?
Don't refer to them by engine numbers, because that gets
Right.
confusing.
I know,
As they get replaced over the years, they just take on the number of the one they're
Right.
replacing. So 3 and 4 are currently the frontline
But I'm saying,
engines.
I'm saying like, you have 2 of them go out, but it's not, this one is not one of the first 2.
Right.
This is be like either one of the third or fourth.
Correct. Yeah.
And is it more the fourth than the third, or does it matter?
Say that again?
Is this one, if in priority, you have the first 2 that go out, then you need another one to go out. Does this one that's broken go out next, or is it this one the?
It doesn't matter. It depends on which station the off-duty guys get to first.
Yes.
Okay, so it's basically where this thing is located depends on where it goes out.
No.
There's 2 at each station.
Right, but I'm just saying, I'm just trying to figure out, we don't have to go into this now, I'm just trying to figure out,
Who's on first?
yeah, who's on first. But is this the pumper that we definitely need, or is there one that?
No,
can still
let
go
me
out?
answer that
We don't have
question.
to have this conversation right now. We
Well,
can have
I
this-
think an answer to that from the 30,000-foot perspective right now is helpful, but then I think that the deeper description of how we respond to different kinds of calls and when there is more than one and that sort of thing would be a good thing for the fire night,
Yeah.
rather than going further into that right now. But on this question of do we really need 4, I can tell you that we vetted that one hard. The chief is a good sport, and he'll stand up there and he'll be professional about talking about the collaboration that has successfully brought us to here, and so will I. It was a difficult process for us to work through because I was very skeptical at the outset of it. I'm looking at the number of vehicles we have, the number of personnel we have, my understanding of how we respond to calls, my reading of the ISO report from a couple of years ago, and I don't know why we can't just have 3 pumpers. Why can't we just let this one die? I have come to understand the risk that we take. Could we tell you that we can't perform the basic function of the fire department? We'd say no, of course we can continue to perform the basic function of the fire department. But the risk we take from that greater reliance, and we'll have it, you're exactly right, for the next 18 months, between now and when we can proceed with this, we'll have that greater dependence on the area mutual aid. But to have that as our permanent state and our intended state puts whoever's house catches fire, not to be too dramatic about it, but seriously, I mean, it comes down to, as long as all we're having is minor incidents, we'd never miss that fourth pumper. The day that we have, a bunch of minor incidents and one of them turns serious, or one real large one again, responding 3 pumpers instead of 4 to that scene is going to put people and property in jeopardy there, because we can't expect that mutual aid will arrive as soon as our own vehicles will. So then it became a question of, well, can we really afford to just go into the wallet to replace this as the 6th vehicle? And that's where I was really pleased with the work that we did working through that process together, to be able to come to you and say, no, we can go from 6 down to 5 and still meet the needs of the department, still maintain the level of service that we provide today, with $500,000 worth of long-term capital savings and a strategic approach that I think is defensible.
So another subsidiary question we're going to want answer to. Since the rescue truck, it sounds like, goes out regularly, it sounds that if we buy the combined pumper rescue, then this pumper rescue may become first line vehicle, because it's got to bring the rescue equipment regularly. So we're going to want to know what impact that will have on the rotation of vehicles, but not now, please, because in fact, this is a short agenda, and I expected to be home at 8:15, and we haven't even got through the capital plan and to the other items on the agenda for the people who don't work here, who are waiting patiently. So that's just another question to be answered on fire presentation day, if that's okay. Peter, if you would then go to the capital plan as a whole.
Sure. So page 1 has the summary of what is being recommended for this year. I'm going to go through it quickly based on the time of the evening and the additional business that needs to be conducted as we go ahead. But we can look at any of these either tonight or in the future in a greater level of detail, and in conjunction with the pages that follow, where you see the actual multi-year plan and how they fit into the overall scheme of things. We'd be happy to do that with you at board's convenience. But this year, what we're recommending is to finish the compliance work here at the Municipal Center with phase 3 of the life safety improvements, to complete energy savings measures. That includes a few more minor miscellaneous things, but that's primarily the Municipal Center's contribution towards a shared pellet boiler system that is proposed by the energy audit for use in heating this building and the library. So you're absolutely right, Select Board Member DeGray, when you point out that we've got an unfinished conversation about this building, and our purpose in proposing this in the manner that we have is so that if that conversation ends up in a place where we've decided to stay here, then this would proceed in the manner that's being proposed, because it has to be replaced for the library. If the library alone is replaced, the opportunity to do the pellet boiler is significantly diminished. But if it's a replacement for the 2 buildings together, the libraries would be replaced by this unit, and the Municipal Center existing boiler would provide the backup. So the primary heating for both buildings would be from the pellet boiler, and when there's either an issue with that or there's a demand sufficient that we need some oil burner supplement, it would come from the existing one within the Municipal Center. So that would be impossible for us. That more energy efficient manner of replacing the boiler at the library, which is on its last legs, would be impossible to accomplish unless we set it out this way. So it doesn't assume an outcome on the municipal center conversation, but it positions us to be able to proceed with this project if that outcome says we're staying here. If we're not, then these numbers will get juggled before the budget is finalized, and we will address it as a standalone replacement for the library. That next item is the air handler energy savings measures at the library for $266,000. You've seen in the detail sheets, there's actually several different components to that. A portion of that funding is what had already been programmed for this year for the replacement of the air handler and the boiler equipment at the library, and a portion of that is the energy savings measures. At DPW, there's an engineering evaluation that needs to be done. I know this is something that you've talked about for the last few years with Steve and Hannah and their presentations. In order to proceed with any of the energy efficiency improvements at that site, we need to know which parts of that site are going to be improved versus those that might be replaced or modified substantially. We've got the salt shed that's on its last legs. That's, could fall down pretty much literally at any time. We need to replace it, but if we just replace it in the exact spot and in the reasonably same dimensions as it is today, we may lose an opportunity to do something smarter and better for the operation of the whole site. So we're recommending what is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small amount, $30,000 for the engineering evaluation and design work, to not necessarily proceed immediately with upgrades at the public works site, but to position ourselves to be able to make smart choices in the future about what we replace and when we replace it. Street paving and improvements, the reduction from $300,000 to $250,000 is based on the fact that we did $500,000 worth of work, or we will have done $500,000 worth of work this year by the time we get done with this year's fiscal year funding. The $300,000 that we funded on our own and $200,000 from the state. The fact that, not to suggest that our streets are all in great condition, but in that particular area where we're investing a good deal of money and trying to maintain a safe street system, we actually played some catch up already this year. We saw that as an opportunity to back off a little bit next year and make sure that other needs that have not been getting met got funded for FY18. That's why we reduced that to $250,000.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but don't we get paving money from the state every year?
Not every year, no. We apply for money and sometimes get it for certain projects. We don't automatically get paving money every year. The $200,000 was tied directly to the bridge project.
I understand that, but I thought there was other funds that we used to get for paving every year from the state.
I don't know if maybe Hannah knows what you're talking about. I don't.
I think he's referring to the inventory that we do every year, and isn't there some annual reimbursement we get from the state?
Correct. I think it's about $221,000, give or take, annually. John, do you know? For the class 1 through 4 road
but that's
money
a general
we get from-
revenue.
Yeah, that's a general fund revenue. It's
Right.
not a capital item.
Right. That's a general revenue to the town for the fact that we're maintaining roads within the town that are part of the state highway system.
Thank you.
Yeah. The William Street intersection, $35,000 is, we think, a wise investment. We think it's our highest priority intersection that has a need for increased safety for vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists. And it also is directly in response to the desire of the board to invest more in traffic safety, pedestrian safety items in future capital budgets. So we looked at what we thought would be the highest priority investment of that type, and we believe that designing a proper intersection improvement at William Street is that investment. Sidewalk repair and replacement. I'm sorry, Dave.
Well, I noticed that the year after that, there's $350,000 to do the intersection improvement.
Sure.
And I'm not sure this is the right time for this question, but if you look along, then comes Green and High Street, and then Maple and Fairview, Canal Maple. We're basically looking at all of the fork intersections.
That's a really good point. So
over $1 million, and I'm wondering, do we really need to change them?
That's correct. And the importance of doing the first year of those pairs for each of the different intersections is that it positions us to be eligible to receive grant funds to help implement them. So the $300,000 placeholder that's not being approved or funded in this year's budget, but would just be the placeholder that might be spent next year to implement the plan that would be developed this year. That's what we, on a very thumbnail basis at this point, think that the improvements at that intersection might cost. But by doing the $35,000 worth of work, we're in a position where we might be able to get grants to implement that work. If it was as a matter of prioritizing the things that need to be done next year, we decided not to spend the $300,000, push it off further into the program, that'd be just fine. You'll remember with Union Hill that there was some design work done, and then it actually took several years before the project actually got constructed. But when we position ourselves, right now we couldn't get a grant to improve the safety of any of the listed intersections. But by proceeding in a manner that we've recommended over the multiple years, we'll position 4 of these intersections to be ready for grant-funded work or to potentially fund those improvements ourselves.
And is there a history of accidents or pedestrian impacts on those?
Well, we're talking at the Vermont Country Deli.
But
that's right. That's the way
next
history.
3, which is comes in at an angle rather than 45, or
right.
a less than 45-degree angle, or
right.
more depending on which side of the angle you're on. And the same with with High Street, and the same with 132,
sure.
and the same with wherever the other one is.
Maple
Maple
and
Street is another thing altogether, and then by John's house there too. But those are all non-right angle. Is the plan to make everything a right angle?
No, not necessarily. At William Street, the likely plan, but until this would be funded and actually analyzed by engineers, we couldn't tell you for sure. But based on the history at that site and some prior engineering work that was done a decade ago, the likely plan would be to square up the eastern part of that Y and widen it so that it could accommodate safely 2 lanes of traffic, and then abandon the western part of the Y and work with the property owner so that there's a public-private project that creates some sidewalk along through there and eliminates the confusion that right now is a hazard. I don't have accident data right off the top of my head, but it is a very hazardous condition for everybody who's using it. The people who are parking there are pulling back out.
Really, really careful because it's so hazardous.
Okay. The sidewalk repair and replacement is recommended here in the capital plan for level funding at $50,000 because we're recommending a substantial increase in the operating budget. The distinguishing factor there is this is the line item from which we do larger scale areas of sidewalk where we're actually going in and replacing, a block or more at a time. The operating fund is where we do spot repairs. So the place where we could make, for instance, the biggest improvement in taking non-compliant intersections and making them ADA compliant so that people who come to a crosswalk, every person who comes to a crosswalk can use that crosswalk to safely get across the street. Those locations, the areas where we just have a couple of squares of badly broken sidewalk and we don't need to do a project that's going to improve a block, but we need to just rip out a couple of bad squares and put in new to keep an area functional. That's done out of the operating budget. And so on that area, in order to get a bigger bang for our buck across the entire community, that's the place where we're recommending increased funding for sidewalks. And here we're recommending a level funding at $50,000. The skate park and dog park numbers are placeholders. They're offset completely. You'll see down below by the $325,000 worth of grants and donations. So that won't be a taxpayer expense, but it would be a capital project expense. And so we show it here to make sure that it's part of the authorized program. The window replacement is part of that multi-year program of replacing all of the windows at the Gibson-Aiken Center. We've done 2 years so far. This would be the 3rd year of funding at $30,000. And then parking lot repairs at the Gibson-Aiken Center for $50,000. The condition there is pretty poor in terms of just the general bumpiness, but the worst issue there is water ponds inappropriately. So in addition to the fact that there's an uneven surface, in the wintertime we get water collecting in the parking lot, in the approach to the door. It becomes a very icy condition, and we've got elderly people and others going in and out of that every single day. So that, when we first looked at it, we thought, well, there's some other areas that might be a good investment of this $50,000 for just the surface condition, but because of the icing that occurs there, we think this is the appropriate place to invest that. Moving to vehicles and equipment, $25,000 is a contribution to a fund that's been accumulating some money over the last couple of years. We haven't been spending the money that's been appropriate, or not all of it, for computer hardware, and we'll be coming to you shortly with the recommended IT improvement plan. And in that, there'll be some substantial hardware expenses where we'll use the accumulated funds and this $25,000, and probably need some additional funding as well. We'll work through that with you and how to implement it, what pace to implement, and what the scope of that, those improvements will be. But this $25,000 is not tied to any specific item, but is a general recurring commitment to IT hardware replacement. The $1 million for the ladder truck is very similar to the skate park and the dog park. You've recently approved that we apply for a grant. We are applying for that grant, hoping to get $990,000 to buy a ladder truck. So it's in here as offset by the grant funds. The thermal imaging camera is removed for the reasons we've discussed extensively. The ballistic vests and the body-worn cameras are relatively smaller expense items, but they're $10,000 or more, so they appear, and they're for durable goods, so they're appearing here in this capital request. We have a smaller than usual dump truck. We have almost every year we have a dump truck to replace. Sometimes those are $250,000, $300,000 vehicles. This is a one-ton dump truck at $115,000. In the interest of time, I won't go into the detail and tell you how old, but you know every time we're replacing one of these are very old pieces of equipment. These are normally well in excess of 10 years old. And the sweeper, street sweeper for the Public Works Department, which I know is an item that's been on a few different times in recent years and has been removed. We believe this sweeper is approaching the same condition as the engine we've just lost and the other vehicles that we have that are in a precarious state. We really don't want to wait for this to completely fail. It's getting to be time where it's not just a prudent, scheduled replacement, but it's getting to be a more urgent replacement. If we don't run a street sweeper around town, we will. The benefit of the street sweeper is that it keeps debris out of our drainage system. So our drainage system, if we didn't have street sweeping, would be compromised by a lot of sand and leaves and other debris that would be getting into the drainage pipes and potentially clogging up that system.
And into the river.
I'm sorry?
And into the river.
And eventually out into the river, that's correct. So there's an environmental issue here as well. But a higher priority, I think, for the broader community is to maintain public safety so we don't have flooding in the streets. There is certainly an interest, reasonable interest also in the environmental protection that it provides to the river by keeping the debris out of the system. That is the full set of items that totals, with the reduction of the thermal imaging camera and the addition of the pumper rescue, it's $3.5 million worth of investment. And just under $1.5 million of transfer from the general fund to fund that. The remaining $2 million being a combination of grants and donations.
Okay, so given the hour, and given that this is the first real budget meeting, we're going to defer questions we might have about any of these individual proposed capital expenditures to be addressed in the context of the individual department budgets. Okay. So if anybody's got questions about any of these items, please raise them during the discussion that's been scheduled for the individual department, and that's both for board members and for members of the public who might have questions about these. The municipal center and general expenditures will be discussed during the town manager and finance department budget discussions. So we'll take one or two more total general summary comments about the budget, but then we're going to move on to the next agenda item. Dave?
Well, this isn't specifically about the budget, but the decision about whether to stay in the municipal center or not. Is there a plan for that to come onto the agenda so we can thoroughly, it seems like we should have that before we decide on the
So
budget.
what I'll say is that we will, depending on the night when we have the town managers and finance department discussion, we will begin to try to have that discussion at that time. There's certainly planning going on at this point to determine whether there are feasible alternatives for rental of the space in the building here to a very stable partner, as stable as they get in the state of Vermont. And we'll begin having that discussion on that night, and then we'll go from there.
And that's approximately a month from now. Mid-December is when we have that, but we also have the additional days in January when we'll likely come together and catch loose ends of this. So there'll be opportunity to go as deeply as we need to into that.
Other questions right now? Well, I think that was a good start on the budget-related issues. I want to thank all staff members for coming and staying this late hour to be available if we had any questions. Now we're going to move on to some other business. Thanks.
May I make one 30-second announcement, which is that next week's budget meeting, we will be doing this week by week as we go ahead through these next couple of months. And next week, it'll be an earlier than usual start to accommodate some scheduling conflicts. So we'll start at 5 o'clock and end at 6:30 next Tuesday night right here. And the two departments that we'll be considering at that time will be police and fire.
Next week, Thanksgiving week or the week after?
No, that's next week.
Next week is 5:30.
The 29th.
29th, I'm sorry.
I had the 22nd at 5:30 and the 29th at 5.
Yeah, the 29th.
I'm sorry.
Is the scheduling conflict.
Okay. So I just gave entirely incorrect.
If you want scheduling information, ask Jan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It is police and fire, but it's a 5:30 start. I'm sorry for the confusion.
Okay,
Yeah.
next Tuesday, 5:30, police and fire, operating budgets to be considered,
Yep.
and any questions about what's in the capital plan. Thank you so much for staying and listening to us and talking to us. The next matter on tonight's agenda, I'm going to note for the ASL interpreters that
Almost done.
I hope we'll be done in a half hour, 45 minutes, so we're going to push through if that's okay with you. Great. The next item on the agenda is the Small Business Assistance Program loan for True North Granola.
So moved.
So, I guess what I'll do is I'll ask Peter to give us a brief overview, and then if the owners of True North Granola want to talk with us about their plans and about getting a little bit of free advertising, this is always a good time.
One quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
How does this generally go after you spend all of the time you just did on the budget? Requesting the money?
Real quick. That's my answer, real quick.
This is money we like to have out.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, Ingrid, it would have helped if you brought some samples. I'm just saying.
Peter, why don't you go ahead?
So True North Granola is an existing successful.
Part of the trick is that you watch on TV until you're sure it's you're next, and then you come 5 minutes before. And it's also the Connie over
The
there.
other is that hopefully we recruit more people to come to our meetings. It's so exciting.
Sorry. Yeah.
True North Granola is existing and successful here in town. They're looking to expand their operation. The proposal has been thoroughly vetted by the Small Business Assistance Program Committee. The request is for $37,000, which is well within the limits of the program. And we recommend your approval. Please feel free to add in details about how valuable this will be for the business.
And so what I'll say is that this microphone over here is picking up audio for the television. It doesn't amplify for the room. And it's the same over here at that table if you want to come over here. But maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about your business and how you're hoping to expand it. Tell us your name.
I'm Ingrid Crisco. My husband Franklin. We are owners of True North. We've been in existence 11 years, and David also knows me in another life, and I've never been accused of being succinct, but in the interest of time, I will be right now. So yes, we are growing. We are both retired educators, and we think of ourselves as our business plan was titled From Educators to Entrepreneurs, and we've learned a lot about entrepreneurship in the past 11 years that we've had the business and grown it. We've loved every minute of it, and we are hardly retired. When people ask us, how is it to be retired? I mean, we have simply shifted our work, but we love every bit of it. And we do need more capacity to increase production in our facility, hence the request for this loan. It is a rotator rack oven, which will at least double our production capacity, and we're expecting it to triple it. So we are hoping that the $683,000 that may exist for funding future loans, we're very close, but we're hoping we get a little piece of it. So you all know about us. You know, one of the things we love about this community is it's a small community, and we get to know each other in wearing a variety of hats, and many of you have probably tried our products and know what they're like.
So the kitchen oven is getting too small?
Oh, John, we started the business in our home, like starting it in the garage. And after 4 years, we moved out to Cotton Mill, which is where we've been. And in that period of time, we've increased our space considerably. We are now picking up 2 other small spaces, but we absolutely need them. So we will have 4 spaces over there at Cotton Mill.
That's great.
Yeah. Mr. DeGray.
Anybody else? Dick?
A couple of 2 quick questions. One about Cotton Mill. But in here in the narrative, it says you'll be hiring 2 additional people when you get the stoves.
Not immediately.
Not immediately?
No.
And then the other one goes to Cotton Mill Hill. You've taken on more space there. Not to put you on the spot, but 11 years. I always looked at Cotton Mill Hill as the incubator space, and as you grew, you moved out into the community and found space in the community, which would allow other incubator space to start up. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I had the same feeling about Cotton Mill when we first moved in, Dick. In fact, I wanted to take out that first 1 year lease in case it didn't work out for us and we could go back home. Clearly, there's no way we could ever go back home. But we have learned we'll be there 8 years come February, that while it had that aura about it as an incubator for small businesses and then they say goodbye after you've grown, it is not that way. I mean, we've been there 8 years, and there are businesses there who have been there far longer than we have. We love being there. It's a great community of entrepreneurs of all kinds. We support each other. And I think the Cotton Mill administration recognizes that support as being helpful for each entrepreneur as well. So they're not anxious to move us out. I hope that Adam isn't watching TV tonight and has a different view of this, but we work very well with the administration there and they with us. We are very good tenants. And they recognize that, and we enjoy their support. So we don't see ourselves being asked to leave anytime soon.
Thank you.
Don't be talking to Adam now.
We talked to Adam. Any other questions from anybody on the board? Anybody else from the town or administration want to add anything? Well,
I
like
move,
we're ready for motion.
You betcha. I move to approve a small business assistance program loan to True North Granola in the amount of $37,000 to be amortized over 7 years at 3% interest.
We have the motion to extend a loan to True North Granola. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. Thanks for staying so long.
It was
I hope it was interesting.
It was.
Oh, stop it, Ingrid.
David and I have been to many board meetings.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The next item on tonight's agenda would be the closeout of the Vermont Community Development Plan Program Planning Grant, but we're gonna take out of order the Windham, Windsor Housing Trust Implementation Grant so that you can go home.
Thank you very much. Should we come here?
Whatever you prefer. That's probably easier given that you have some show and tell.
Well, I'm Connie Snow, Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. This is Pete Paggi, our Director of Housing Development. And we're going to give a little overview, and we'll try to be succinct so you can all go home.
Connie, this isn't late for you.
It is actually. So first I want to say that we really appreciate your consideration of this request. Just a little bit of background. Some of you may know that after the downturn, there was a spike in homelessness in Vermont. It was about 25% increase in homelessness. While it hadn't been a specific focus of ours prior to then, in the last 3 years, we've been thinking more and more about possible responses to this issue. Our board felt that we should consider a variety of responses. So we had heard of this model of permanent supportive housing. About a year and a half ago, we traveled down to Connecticut and looked at a few developments. It's a tested and respected, very successful model. I can tell you some of the hallmarks of this model, which is that it combines housing with supportive services, on-site supportive services, wraparound services. There are no preconditions for entering the housing. So in other words, it's called a housing first model. You don't have to get sober first. You get housing first, on the theory that when people have housing, then they can address some of their other issues. The services are all voluntary. So interestingly, we were looking at this model, and the state of Vermont commissioned a housing needs assessment. It was done by a group called Bowen National Research, and their conclusion, one of their conclusions, one of their many, but was that housing alternatives for the homeless and for special needs populations are very limited in Vermont and in Windham County, and that the best model for addressing this need is permanent supportive housing. So that was supported by the state's Bowen study. So I can talk a lot about the success of this model, but I won't. You can ask questions if you'd like. But what we're proposing, we have an option on the Lamplighter Motel, the buildings that are on the westerly side. Pete's going to show you in a minute. The proposal is that the motel would be converted into 22 fully contained apartments. They would be what we call micro apartments. They're about 350 square feet, but they have a kitchen and they have a bath, everything that you need. 11 of the 22 apartments would be targeted to the homeless. The other would be housing a general population. We have memorandums of understanding with 2 service providers. Groundworks Collaborative would provide the services in the way of life skills, homeless follow-up, budgeting, that kind of thing, and healthcare, HCRS, Healthcare and Rehabilitation Services, would provide mental health counseling and substance abuse counseling. So why don't I leave it at that? Pete, you want to describe the...
Sure. So, as Connie said, we have an option on the Lamplighter, which currently has 2 buildings on the westerly side. There's the one building directly north of Panda North that you can see from the road, and then a building that's kind of set back and a little hidden from the road. What we are proposing is converting the southerly building, which you can see on the site plan as closer to Panda North, into 8 efficiency apartments. And then in the northerly building, we will have 14 one-bedroom apartments. Part of the construction will be a 4-unit addition on the end of the northerly building, 2 units kind of continuing the line of the building, and 2 additional units making that L shape that you can see. In addition, we're going to have a new construction community building, which is the building in the center there that kind of makes the U shape around the common green. This is going to have a living room space that'll be open to residents. It'll have laundry facilities for the residents. It'll have a community kitchen, and it will also have office spaces that the supportive services that Connie mentioned will be able to use, as well as a conference room for private meetings. We are also proposing a solar photovoltaic array on Building B, which will help offset some of the electric costs for our HVAC systems. And as Connie said, the units are going to be about 350 square feet. So they'll be small apartments, but they'll have full kitchens. So small, range tops, about a 10 cubic foot refrigerator. So a small refrigerator, a full sink, and we'll also be including some built-in furnishings. As Connie said, 11 of the units will be targeted to homeless populations. So we'll include built-ins like a dresser with a mirror and maybe a built-in table as well. So if there are any questions on the building design?
The grant application for $450,000 almost is just a small part of a total budget that's about 10 times that?
Correct, yes.
4.3 million, yeah.
Yep, and the rest of our funding is coming from the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston Affordable Housing Program.
Well, I'm just going to jump right in and say that when I saw the project review sheet come through from Act 250, I had not heard anything about this before, and the idea of having, it sounds like transitional housing in this location and supportive housing, hopefully to move people on to other environments, is a real critical need here in Brattleboro, and I was hoping that this is what I would find out more in detail about after seeing the project review sheet. And I know about the current use of this facility a lot from my day job as a prosecutor dealing with very vulnerable populations. And I think this is just an excellent project. I want to commend you for putting this together and working on this. I just think it's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it here.
Great, thank you.
Dick?
I'm going to be the party pooper, sorry. How is the building that you're going to build to in the center going to be taxed at? I know you're going to be taxed at market. You have a special tax rate, I understand that, per unit. But the building where you're going to be providing services, what is that going to be taxed at? What rate will that be? Because that doesn't fall under your normal guidelines.
Right. Deb Zach on our staff is the expert on the formula for, there's a formula for coming up with fair market value for covenant restricted properties, which this is. Usually, as long as, I know in the tax credit program, if the common area is only, it has to be proportionate to the residential area, and then it's considered a part of the residential area. I can't say for sure if that's the way the tax formula works, but we will find out the answer to that question.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I'd just like to respond to that. I can't answer the specific question about that one particular building. I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate that, but I did confer with Russell about it, and Patrick had prior to that, and it's included in the memorandum, that we don't anticipate any loss of tax revenue. Russell has amplified that actually by explaining to me that in the fullness of what's expected to go on at the site, he thinks there'll probably be some modest amount of increased tax revenue after the project, but we can't be certain of that. He is confident that there wouldn't be any reduced tax revenue for this.
I took a ride up there, not that I don't ride up there every day, but I took a ride up there specifically today, and I'm not opposed to what you're proposing. I am concerned about the safety of the people who are going to be occupying that space. There are no contiguous sidewalks up there. Mm-hmm. I was looking at that, and I'm going, you put this stuff down and you people think that, if you're going to walk to the supermarket, well, Hannaford's is a good walk away, and there isn't one sidewalk on one side, And there are many spots on both sides of the roads where there is no sidewalk. And the only place that I actually saw a crosswalk where I didn't think I was gonna see one is in the roundabout. And each section of the roundabout has a crosswalk. Other than that, pedestrian safety for the people that are gonna be there, most likely, especially 11 homeless people, I don't think they're gonna be driving up in their Cadillacs and staying there. So I have real concerns about the safety of the people who are going to be in this proposed site in terms of traveling on the most heavily traveled road in the town of Brattleboro.
Yeah, we've thought about this quite a bit, and we considered the sidewalk system and ended up deciding, because it is interrupted, I know over time you're trying to get continuous sidewalks, but I guess it's as people improve their properties. We also understand that in the winter they aren't always maintained. So we figured out that really it was better to focus on the public transportation system. So we have looked into that pretty extensively. There's 2 routes that pass that, and we've talked to the Current?
Yes.
The Current, and they are open to putting, well, we would put a shelter right on site.
There is no shelter where the bus stop is now. I couldn't find the shelter.
Yeah, we would build a shelter, and I think they might take ownership of it, but we would build it right on site so somebody could sit in the shelter for the bus. There's 5 or 7 buses a day, 2 different routes, some going to Bellows Falls, most going to Brattleboro. So we do want to work with them on increasing weekend coverage. So we agree, but we agree that it's important to keep people safe and that they're able to get downtown. And we thought the sidewalks might be a way to do that, but there are too many missing links right now. So we believe the best way is to focus on the public transportation. There's also the dial-a-ride van, and there's other options, but our focus right now is on the public transportation.
Is there a restriction on how long anyone will be allowed to stay there?
No, I will say it's not technically transitional. It's permanent housing, so someone can stay as long as they like or feel a need to stay. For the 11 units for the homeless, there is the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which is one of the leaders in the field. They recommend using kind of a vulnerability index, so people that come into the system in Brattleboro, the coordinated entry system that I think Groundworks is taking the lead on, there will be a group that will decide who the most vulnerable are, and you really want to target those people for this kind of housing because you've got the services. But they can stay as long as they like. It's considered permanent.
And to that point, our funders require a minimum lease of a year. So, yeah.
Is there a school bus route?
A school bus route? Well, there will be no children here. They're all either efficiencies or 1-bedrooms. Yeah.
Will they be, no children, and the maximum in this efficiency unit would be 2 people if there's a couple, or is it 1-person housing?
I guess we would consider a couple. I think we're mostly going to see single people. I think that's who will apply.
Hi, Connie.
Hello.
How are you? Well, I've never been too shy about, I'm on the fence on Windham, Windsor Land Trust. I've always, and I've never been shy. But I got to tell you, this is exactly what I think Windham, Windsor Land Trust is for. I read through everything. I've been up there, I've driven around that area a lot. And like Kate said, she didn't really realize that there was another building behind there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always been there. It's going to be an incredible improvement. I think the pedestrian thing will work itself out. I got a feeling, the homeless are really concerned about how they get from point A to point B. I think the biggest need is to get them out of the weather and into some place that's safe. Again, I think the transportation of that will work itself out. But I read through this, and I like David said, I applaud you on this. This is wonderful.
Great, great.
It's a huge need.
Great.
But I just can't believe the price of it.
Yeah, construction costs are going through
I'm
the
in
roof.
it.
Yeah.
And and I always question this with Brattleboro housing, with everything, how much it is per unit. you know.
Well, it all goes out to bid, so we get competitive bids from contractors, so we know we're getting the best price we can get. But it's incredibly, and it's part of why we looked for a motel. This has actually been done in Burlington, and because these are small, these are micro apartments, and it lends itself to a conversion like this, and believe it or not, is a little more cost effective than creating a bigger, a bigger apartment in a smaller building downtown or anywhere really. So we were really looking for this type of structure.
And I don't know if you'll have this, what does it break down to per unit? I mean.
It's 197,000. Yeah.
Yeah, but the buildings on Green Street were just phenomenally expensive. The renovations
I know.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount.
Well, you have to understand that we do this for perpetuity. I mean, we're in this, so we need the high quality, we need the finishes that will stand the test of time and be easy to maintain. And there's also a lot of government obligations that are placed on us that other builders won't. Accessibility, energy efficiency. Believe it or not, the historic people have been out to look at the lamplighters. So it's
really.
We have
last Thursday.
Archaeology. We're doing it all because that's what we have to do for the federal funding. So it's quite expensive.
Well, I don't care what it costs. This is a wonderful idea.
Patrick, before Patrick has hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Gretchen. I just wanted to ask that in addition to the adoption of the resolution as proposed in the memo, if we could conduct a public hearing to take any public comment as part of this, that would be very helpful.
Did I know we needed a public hearing?
I didn't know we needed a public hearing, but that's good.
All right,
Okay,
I open
thank
the public hearing. And I incorporate everything that's been said since the beginning of the discussion into the public hearing. So now, as part of this continuing public hearing, Mr. DeGray.
You will be providing furniture, I mean, I heard you say a bureau, but bedding and everything else.
Yeah, we haven't quite gotten that far, but I'm sure we'll provide beds, yeah.
And maintaining, I guess you'll be providing that service also, I would suspect.
Maintaining the building?
I mean, when I look at the occupants that you're gonna have, I would suspect that the maintaining of those, and possibly the turnover that you're gonna have, a lease is a lease is a lease when you're dealing with these vulnerable people. That piece of paper, if I'm going on the road, doesn't make any difference. They don't have any, excuse the expression, skin in the game, so it's not like, okay, I'm gonna lose this if I walk out on the lease.
Right.
So the maintaining of the of the properties, and is that part of the funding that's in here? Because I didn't see that.
Well, in the operating budget, we have money for turning over apartments and maintaining the buildings.
And so, on a lighter note, when you're talking about homeless people, when they then now have housing, they would not be considered homeless, correct?
Correct. Correct.
An oxymoron, right?
Right, formerly homeless.
Formerly homeless.
Right, right.
Super quick question. You have in the budget relocation of existing tenants. Are any of the people living there now going to come back and live there?
Some might, because we'll have 11 untargeted units. I think, quite honestly, we spent an afternoon in the office out there and met just about everybody. Some said they were on our waiting list at the Housing Trust. I mean, really, people are spending between $700 and $900 a month for a unit that has no kitchen. So many of these people have enough income to be renting an apartment, a full apartment. So I think there'll be sort of a shuffling, but certainly they have the right to go back. That's with the Uniform Relocation Act, we follow all the guidelines, and they do have the right to go back if that's what they would like.
That was my question, because we're not going to displace somebody to.
No, no.
Other questions from anybody on board? Or anybody who's still in attendance? I move to adopt the resolution.
Bad gig.
If there's nothing further, close the public hearing.
No, it's closed.
Ray, nothing to say?
Please be quiet. It's too late. David, it's too late.
It's still early, John. I move to adopt the resolution authorizing the submission of an implementation grant application in the amount of $449,000 to the Vermont Community Development Program to support the Brattleboro Permanent Supportive Housing Project for Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. Is there any further discussion? We have a motion to adopt this implementation grant resolution to support this loan. This grant.
Loan.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed or abstaining? It carries 5-0. Thanks for coming and staying.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I believe the last item on the agenda is the closeout of the Vermont Community Development Program Planning Grant for Groundworks Collaborative. Peter?
So this also is a public hearing, probably be appropriate for you to go ahead and open it, and then I'll speak to it.
Using our new procedures, I open the public hearing.
The planning grant, as you'll recall, we supported this. It was awarded last spring. Work went on through the year, through the summer. The purpose of it was to help Groundworks to develop a plan for the Frost Street location where they had hoped to create a multi-purpose facility, some overnight housing for the homeless population, as well as a location for their offices and some services that would be provided. That work was completed. A plan was drawn up. For reasons unrelated to the work of this planning grant and unrelated also to some other visible community dialogue around that project at that time, at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, I believe it was. The funding for this project changed. You know, there was an out-of-state funder who had interest in this that had a change of circumstance and wasn't able to provide the funds for this that had been intended. As a result of losing the funding, the time elapsed on the option for the property, and so Groundworks was not able to proceed and purchase this location. They are continuing to look in most immediate terms, together with some of us on the town staff as well as others in the community, did some work to work out the ability to use the Baptist Church for one last winter as the overnight shelter during the cold weather months. They're continuing to search for a replacement overnight shelter for the winter of 2017-2018, and are going to resume work on developing a plan for a longer term, more permanent presence in the community. But for now, for the purposes of this particular grant, it served its purposes. It funded the planning work. Unfortunately, the project didn't move forward. It's the first one that I've been involved with that has ended this way. Patrick and I had some communication around this, though, in preparation for this evening, where he made a point I think is really valid and appropriate for the record on this one tonight, that when the state awards planning grants, they have a different expectation than when they award a project grant. So when it's a project, there's an expectation it's going to get built and it's going to be successful, and the outcomes will support the investment. When it's planning grant, by definition, it's an exploration of something that's a worthy idea that might become a good project. And when one of those ends, as this one is, with a report rather than a project, That's not an indication of failure, it's just the outcome for that particular one. So.
Any questions from anybody on the board about this? Is there any action that the board needs to take?
There is no action that the board needs to take. You just needed to hold this public hearing. We'll send the record up as part of the file.
So we'll note that this implementation, or this planning grant was spent and the project wasn't able to be completed, and that the grant has now been, or is being closed out. We'll close the public hearing. Is there any further business to come in front of the select board meeting tonight? Ready for motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed or abstaining, that carries 5-0. I want to thank everybody who's been watching live or recorded. I want to thank our member of the press, our KSL interpreters, our VCDP operators, and everybody who was in attendance tonight and made this a lively discussion tonight.
Did we vote on?